Have quorum, and so I will begin this public hearing of AUKUS. Before you, we've got our first witnesses that have joined us remotely. We've got a panel discussion first up, and we also have a number of our members that have joined us remotely, and myself and Mr Zappia here in Parliament House. So the formal words: I declare open this public hearing of the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties for its inquiry into the nuclear-powered submarines partnership and collaboration agreement between the Government of Australia and the Government of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who might be joining us today. In accordance with the Committee's resolution of 31 July 2025, this hearing will be broadcast and the proof and official transcripts of the proceedings will be published on the Parliament's website. I remind all members of the media for the need of fair and accurate reporting for the proceedings of the Committee. Before I call our first witnesses, just remind people that because most of the participants in this hearing will be participating remotely, to please have yourself on mute unless you have the call. It might get a bit messy, but just like all the other remote hearings we've done, we will accommodate and do our best where we can. I remind committee members to message via the signals group or let the Secretariat know or use the hands up function to let us know if you have a question. So I'll now call our first witnesses. I'd now like to welcome representatives from the Friends of the Earth Australia, Friends of the Earth Adelaide and the Australian Conservation Foundation to give evidence today. For their Hansard record, would you please all state your full name and the capacity in which you are appearing before us? And first of all, can I ask Dr Green?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My name is Jim Green and I'm representing Friends of the Earth Australia, and our first recommendation is simply for the treaty to be rejected.
Just a minute.
And I would draw your attention.
Sorry, just to interrupt for a moment. We're just introducing ourselves and then there's another set of words I have to do and then I'll invite you to make an opening statement. So all I need at the moment is for our 4 witnesses that are here to state their name and the capacity in which they are appearing. So next, let's go to Mr Dear-Jones to introduce yourself and say the capacity in which you are appearing today.
Hi, I'm Tim Dear-Jones. I'm speaking to you from Wales in the UK, and I'm appearing in my capacity as a consultant researcher who has written a report about the AUKUS submarines for FOE Australia.
Thank you. Mr White?
Hello, my name is Philip White and I'm representing Friends of the Earth Adelaide.
Thank you. Good to see you again, Mr White. And Mr Sweeney, Mr Dave Sweeney.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Dave Sweeney, and I'm a nuclear policy analyst with the Australian Conservation Foundation, and I'm joining you today from Boonwurrung Country in Gippsland.
Great, thank you. Before we go to opening statements, a few more formal words that I need to read out. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standings as the proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. It is the responsibility of witnesses to accurately record any questions on notice that are taken. I would now like to invite each of you to make an opening statement before we proceed to a discussion and questions from members. So let's go back to Dr Jim Green. Would you like to make an opening statement? And then we'll hear from each of you in turn.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Our first recommendation is to reject the treaty, and I would draw your attention in particular to 2 submissions that you have received, which outlining graphic detail how flawed the British nuclear submarine program is and the sorts of problems that will inevitably emerge if we continue to go down this path with AUKUS. One of those submissions is from Tim Deere-Jones, who we'll hear from in a moment. But since he's not here, I would like to just mention a couple of points from the submission from Rear Admiral Peter Briggs, who's a long-time submariner. And Rear Admiral Briggs states that the treaty protects the UK against any claims for flaws in SN AUKUS design or delays in delivery. And there is a recommendation from Friends of the Earth flowing from that, which is to amend the liability provisions in the treaty to address the problem that Rear Admiral Briggs has mentioned. He further states in his submission that the path we are on has a high risk of failure, and many of these risks are completely beyond our control. The treaty will make Australia entirely dependent on an already fragile UK submarine industry. UK submarine capability is in a mess. The astute SSN program is in a mess. UK submarine arm appears to have fallen below critical mass. Recovery will be challenging and prolonged. The project to manufacture the reactor cores for the new ballistic missile submarines and SSN AUKUS is in serious difficulties. Based on past performance and the issues set out above, the British program to deliver SSN AUKUS cannot be fast-tracked. Indeed, it is highly likely that it will be late and over budget. And finally, the existing plan, the so-called optimal pathway, is comprised of multiple serious serial risks. I would describe it as a quagmire. Those are the words of Rear Admiral Briggs, and they're shocking, and committee members should be shocked, and you should be contemplating the problems very seriously. My second set of comments, and my final set of comments, is a recommendation to amend the treaty to ensure Australian compliance with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, including the clause that states that no storage or disposal of hazardous wastes shall take place on the lands of Indigenous peoples without their free, prior and informed consent. This is an issue particularly with respect to nuclear waste management, but also more broadly with respect to AUKUS. And in support of that recommendation, I would also draw your attention to Federal Parliament's Joint Standing Committee on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs. And they said in their November 2023 report, they recommended that the Commonwealth Government ensure its approach to developing legislation and policy should be consistent with the articles outlined in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So I'll leave it there with that recommendation that the treaty needs to be amended to protect the rights of Australia's First Nations peoples, particularly given the sordid history of atomic bomb tests and repeated attempts to dump nuclear waste on Aboriginal land without their consent over the past 25 years. And I'll leave it there, Chair.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Green. If you could pop yourself on mute whilst we go to our next witness. Mr. Tim Deere-Jones, did you want to add anything further on behalf of Friends of the Earth?
Yeah, I would be grateful for the opportunity, Chair. I have 40 years of experience of working on marine radioactivity and hazardous cargo issues, much of it based around. During that period, I've spent a lot of time looking at nuclear submarine issues in the UK. And as you can see from my report, a range of problems have arisen. As Jim said, our submarine program here is in extreme disarray. Constant overspends, constant underperformance of production and build, many problems with actual deployment, massive problems with decommissioning of the submarines, where to put the waste and how to deal with it when you've got it out. And I think the lessons that I have attempted to convey in my report for the Australian AUKUS program should be a matter of considerable concern for you. In particular, I have problems about, as I said, the manufacture and deployment of nuclear-powered attack submarines, the abandonment of the naval test reactor, which we had in the UK, which has been referred to in my report and is a major issue here now, because we're now moving into a program of building submarine reactors with no pre-test to them. So they're going to be built and slapped straight into boats. And that includes the AUKUS boats, whereas previously we had a long period in the UK where the submarine reactors would be tested for at least 2 or 3 years before actual deployment in the naval program. So there's that. Then there's the issue of the disposal of the waste. Any form of maintenance in UK submarine docks and repair yards has always involved discharges of radioactive waste to air and to the marine environment, to the detriment of the environment and local communities. And finally, one of the major issues, which is very little talked about in the issues of nuclear submarines, is the interactions between nuclear submarines and civilian vessels, which in the UK has been lethal in a number of circumstances for fishermen and marine and sea users, and has cost a considerable amount of money to fishing communities by way of lost boats and lost gear. So I'll stop there. There's many more issues, but I think that'll do to go on with. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And we'll now go to Mr. Philip White from Friends of the Earth Adelaide. If you could just pop yourself on mute, Mr. Dear Jones, whilst we go to Mr. Philip White. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to present my views on behalf of Friends of the Earth Adelaide. Both the trilateral AUKUS agreement and the bilateral AUK agreement are problematic for many reasons, as discussed in our written submission. Today I'll just focus on the security dimension. These agreements are not in Australia's security interests. They don't make Australia safer. Rather, they make Australians less safe while compromising Australia's sovereignty. This is not just the view of so-called radical lefty greenie peaceniks. It's a view shared by many people whose careers were deeply embedded within the Australian political and military establishment. For example, former Deputy Secretary of Defence and author of the 2000 Defence White Paper, Professor Hugh White, retired Australian Army Major General Michael Smith, former Prime Ministers Paul Keating and Malcolm Turnbull, former Foreign Ministers Gareth Evans and Bob Carr, former Liberal Party leader John Hewson, and former Australian Defence Chief Admiral Chris Barry, who in the early 2000s argued for nuclear-powered submarines, now questions whether AUKUS submarines are a strategic priority. You can refer for that to a report released recently by the Australian Security Leaders Climate Group, of which he is a member. Now, these are not people whose opinions can be dismissed as naive and ill-informed. They are people who, having been liberated from the constraints of office, are sounding the alarm. It's incumbent on committees like this to take note. Sam Roggeveen is director of the International Security Program at the Lowy Institute. He believes that AUKUS is undermining our diplomacy in the Pacific. It gets in the way of our goal of maintaining our influence in the Pacific and at the same time preventing China from getting a foothold. It actually incentivises China to try to acquire bases in the Pacific. He points out that AUKUS makes us less safe by turning Australian submarine ports into targets. Why? Because the best time to target a nuclear-powered submarine is before it submerges. That is, when it is in port. So AUKUS turns our submarine ports into targets. AUKUS compromises Australia's sovereignty. Minister for Defence Richard Marles claims that Australia will make its own decisions about the use of our nuclear-powered submarines. This is not credible. Whatever Mr Marles might say, there is no chance that the America First administration of Donald Trump would allow Australia to acquire Virginia-class submarines unless we first commit to making them available in support of US operations when requested. If the US went to war with China over Taiwan, it would be the height of folly to believe that Australia could refuse to send our nuclear-powered submarines. So AUKUS would drag us into a war which is against our national interests. Let us be clear-eyed about the US part of AUKUS. The US is no longer the country that it was. We might still have a shared language, but our values have diverged. The values of Trump-led America frighten most Australians. President Trump's actions are straight out of the playbook of other authoritarians around the world. He has no respect for the rule of law, either nationally or internationally. He has no compunction about making previously unimaginable threats to close allies. Trump's America is not a country that Australia should rely on for its national security. Major General Michael Smith and Admiral Chris Barry are calling for a broader view of national security. Climate change is the biggest single threat to our security, but the focus on AUKUS and the so-called China threat obscures the fact that our security is threatened by many other things that should be assessed in a proper national security assessment. It also skews the allocation of scarce resources. That applies to the allocation of resources within defence and also to the allocation of resources to the broader spectrum of issues affecting the security of Australians. Our wider national security considerations need to be seen through a lens broader than simply defence. Due to its enormous cost, AUKUS detracts from our security by robbing these other important areas of much-needed funding. What I have said so far assumes that the US and the UK have the capacity to actually deliver the proposed nuclear-powered submarines. That is a very dubious assumption, as Jim Green mentioned by quoting Peter Briggs. The record of both countries in constructing nuclear-powered submarines suggests that they don't have the industrial capacity to deliver submarines to Australia on time and on budget, if at all. But if we wait for the project to fail, there will be a huge opportunity cost. To minimise this opportunity cost, the government should immediately suspend AUKUS and begin a broad-based review of Australia's national security, as suggested by Major General Michael Smith and Admiral Chris Barry. J. Scott should recommend such a review be undertaken before the AUKUS agreement is signed and before proceeding with AUKUS. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, for this session, David Sweeney.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I'm representing ACF, the Australian Conservation, today, where I work as a nuclear policy analyst. ACF welcomes this opportunity to speak because we have believed there's been limited scrutiny around AUKUS. We believe there's been undue secrecy from day one. It was announced by former Prime Minister Scott Morrison by surprise. There was no white paper, no green paper, no discussion papers, no independent review of the rationale or the assumptions. It was agreed speedily by Labor in opposition in a highly politicised context. It's been prosecuted by Labor in government without caveats or a lot of scrutiny. And that's been highlighted in the National Interest Assessment to this proposed treaty action, which says no public, industry or non-governmental consultation has been undertaken as the agreement relates to national security. We believe that there's legitimate national security considerations, but there are equally and more important legitimate national scrutiny considerations with AUKUS. In September 2021, when it was announced, the Chief of Navy said that this was a decision that will no doubt change the shape of our nation. So a key ACF call through this is for an independent review, not a segmented modular assessment of component parts of the project, but a holistic, comprehensive, independent review that examines the assumptions and the rationale. This hasn't happened, it needs to. ACF strongly supports a call from the crossbench and Greens for independent assessment. We have concerns, extensive concerns about the AUKUS plans, and these have been discussed, Chair, in our submission, in previous parliamentary and legislative interventions, and they've been raised publicly and in media comment. Some of these include nuclear safety and waste concerns. As an environment organisation, they're a key core concern for us. On November the 1st this year, less than a month from today, there's going to be a dedicated naval nuclear regulator who will take control of regulation of AUKUS-related nuclear issues. Now, we have raised detailed concerns over this new office, its lack of functional separation and independence from the AUKUS proponent, its lack of public reporting mechanisms, the fact that it can be directed by the Minister of Defence, is housed in Defence and more. We believe that our coasts, our waters, our ports, our port communities deserve better assurance than this mechanism provides. We have deep concerns that the approach being taken will continue to prioritise military confidentiality over community confidence, and it'll continue to prioritise those the military's needs over environmental stewardship, nuclear responsibility and accountability. And we're really worried about that in relation to radioactive waste. As many in the committee will be aware, radioactive waste is a long-running and highly contested public policy arena in Australia on the domestic front. There's no reason to think it'll be any different in relation to high-level military waste, especially if the government maintains a top-down centralised approach. And we urge J. Scott and support the call made by Dr Jim Green. We urge J. Scott to circuit break this issue and seek to address widespread community concern by calling for the formal adoption of free, prior and informed consent as a foundation principle in radioactive waste siting and management. That would be consistent with international best practice, consistent with the UN Special Rapporteur's report 2024 on Australian toxics, consistent with the 2023 Senate inquiry, and it would recognise really deep community concern. We've made a number of recommendations in our submission. I commend them to you. And in closing my introductory remarks, I want to highlight one key of these recommendations, Chair, and that's that we're very concerned about mission creep with AUKUS, including a future expansion from facilitating, hosting and servicing nuclear-powered vessels to potentially accepting nuclear-armed ones. And this is a deep concern, especially given that both of our AUKUS partners are nuclear weapon states. Now, ACF welcomes the repeated statements that AUKUS involves nuclear power and does not involve nuclear weapons, but we want to see this formalised and codified. We want to see two clear actions to give operation effect to these assurances. The first one is the recognition that Australians have the right to know and the right to say no. We must not accept in our nation nuclear ambiguity from our AUKUS partners. We must not accept neither confirm nor deny. We need to know if their vessels, planes or other platforms are carrying nuclear weapons. And finally, and vitally, we must set clear nuclear guardrails and guidelines, and in particular this is done by advancing signature and ratification of the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, our best way to control and abolish our worst weapons. And signing this, Chair, would send a message from Birdsville to Beijing, from Wagga to Washington, that Australia stands on the side of the international rules-based order and stands against the use of inhumane, unlawful weapons of mass murder. Thanks for your time. Look forward to any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for those opening statements. I do have a few committee members who've put their hand up to ask questions. I just wanted to check in with Senator Wilson. Were you hoping to ask some questions, Senator?
Yes, Chair. I've just got a couple. I was about to text you, so whenever it suits.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. So the order is I'll ask a couple, then we'll go to Senator Wilson, and then we'll go to the member for Sturt. So we'll just try and alternate it a bit, and then I reckon the member for Macon's got some questions too. So I've only got a couple just clarifying on the nuclear waste issue, and I just wanted to seek clarification, starting with you, Mr. Dear Jones. In your opening statement, you made a comment about discharge of nuclear waste into oceans and seas. Did I mishear that? Can you just expand a bit on that, your understanding of when it comes to this program, the impact or what is nuclear waste and how it will be disposed of? And if you could just clarify that, if I might have misheard it, but if you could clarify that for me.
Thank you, Chair. You didn't mishear. The UK experience is that once you've got nuclear-powered submarines deployed off the stocks and in the sea, they will always require some form of maintenance. And we have had a series of reactor types put into the UK boats, some of which were supposed to be lifetime reactors, i.e. to be supposedly to function without repair or removal and replacement for the lifetime of the boat. but they've always, some of them of a particular reactor class have required some form of maintenance. Once you open up a PWR, you've got to deal with quite a lot of radioactivity. In particular, there are 3 or 4 nuclides which are a major issue for the environment. And once you open them up, you can't avoid having discharges to the atmosphere and discharges to water. Sometimes purposeful, but very often as a result of accidents in the handling and management of the process. So we have an attack nuclear submarine base at Devonport in the southwest of the UK, where they've done regular maintenance on our attack submarines powered by PWRs, and discharges of tritium and cobalt-60 in particular are of particular concern, and you can find tritium and cobalt-60 cropping up many miles downstream by marine current and tidal action, is what I mean by downstream, along the coast. And because we now know that marine radioactivity can transfer from the sea to the land in detectable quantities, people have now begun to realize that we are getting marine radioactivity into the terrestrial coastal zone, i.e. it's blowing in conditions of storm and bubble break in waves. It's blowing ashore over the coastline. And I think the nearest that it has actually scientifically been proved is that you can find this stuff 10 miles inland in pasture grass and agricultural produce, which people are then going to be consuming. So there's a major concern. The other concern is, what do you do with reactors and their used fuel when the boat has exceeded its lifetime and is being laid up and you've got to decommission it? And this is a major problem, because then you have your radioactive fuel, which being uranium-based fuel, as a result of burning the stuff, you've got plutonium and americium and these radionuclides, which are alpha emitters, which can have a half-life of hundreds of thousands of years. The reactor itself is hugely radioactive. It's a large lump of material, certainly the size of a car, maybe depending on the particular design and make and its function, it can be larger than that. You've got to get it out safely from the boat. You've got to transport it to a dump site. If you haven't got a geological disposal facility, as we haven't got in the UK, then you've got to find an above-ground storage site to keep it, where you can keep it safe. You've got to be able to monitor it. You've got to be able to condition it if it has any particular problems and looks like some form of runaway corrosion and leak potential. All of this costs an enormous amount of money, because you've got to be watching the stuff. You've got to build the facilities to remove it out of the boats. You've got to build the facilities to keep it safe from the public and the environment while it's waiting to be transported to its intermediate period dump site. Then you've got to be looking for a long-term, hopefully perpetual dump site for it, none of which we've managed to do in the UK, despite having many decades of nuclear submarines. Our reactors are still either stored in the boats, which are now rotting afloat, or at a place called Sellafield, above ground. The cost of these facilities keeps ballooning. The expense of maintaining them and manning them keeps ballooning. And meanwhile, you've got this heavily radioactive material which sits in various above-ground sites. And I heard the word targets in the event of nuclear war being mentioned earlier on. And of course, these above-ground dump sites are prime targets for an enemy who can hit them, not necessarily with a nuclear missile, but with a cruise missile. And it'll create the effect of a dirty nuclear bomb. So the waste problem is a live issue in the UK. It's ongoing. It's getting worse. And so far, I've seen no sign from the Australian government's nuclear program or AUKUS program that they've really begun any form of work on that. And it'll take at least the time scale between now and when those boats are supposed to be delivered to you for you to be able to get a decent way on with that program of finding the facilities to manage and store and eventually dispose of these nuclear wastes. So, yeah, it's a big problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to the Senator. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask you, Tim, you mentioned lots of the challenges there that you're experiencing in the UK with disposal of nuclear waste as well as the submarines themselves. What do you do with decommissioned reactors and submarines? Do you have a plan? And how long have you been investigating this exact issue?
Okay, well, the UK plan sort of really emerged as it became necessary to decommission the first class of nuclear submarines. As far as I can see, there doesn't seem to have been any pre-planning at the stage when my country opted to have nuclear-powered submarines. They don't seem to have prepared for that eventuality. Well, the boats managed to last. I think that first class of boat lasted about 20 years, and then they began to be decommissioned. Some of them, this is now going back to the 1960s, some of them are still at a place called Rosyth in northern Scotland, on the east coast there, where they're in dock. Their hulls are beginning to rot, so the hulls need maintenance. Most of them, I think only one has successfully had its reactor taken out and removed. So I think we've got something like 19 to 20 of them now sitting there in rows in Rosyth, decomposing away. And the plans are perpetually being updated, but perpetually falling behind the new update because it's all new, and every design of boat and design of reactor seems to present a new set of concerns and issues. Okay, so, think about old cars. Imagine taking an engine out of a very old car. It's fairly straightforward, but as you get more complicated, it gets more difficult, and you get bigger engines with more and more bits attached to them, stuffed into a similar-sized body. So the complexities of removing these things becomes more and more confusing. The manpower costs are going up because the national wages is increasing all the time. The cost of materials for managing the process, robots and so on, to be able to do it remotely, that's all increasing. So we are still formulating and reformulating the plans in the UK. And so far, every time we have a government commission to review the finances and the process, the government commission or the auditing body comes out with the conclusion that, hey, we're falling behind time, we're falling behind the costs, and it's urgent, and you've got to get on with it quickly before something really bad begins to happen. So that's our experience here, I'm afraid. And one of the main pushes of my report to FO Australia was that that's got to be considered before you really engage with this process. You've got to really think about that, start budgeting ahead with the realization that all the costs are going to continue to rise because of material costs and manpower costs.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the, I suppose, selling points of AUKUS in Australia has been that we can share your lived experience and expertise as a partner, as we would with the US. So you're saying in terms of decommissioning these nuclear submarines and disposal of waste, if we were to ask you, how would we do it? Right now we would get, don't ask us kind of response, or would the UK government be able to provide Australia with that kind of expertise?
Oh, the UK government would provide you with its plans. But it might be a little more reticent,
right.
A little more reticent about the success and the viability of those plans in the timescales which have been set out. Yes.
Okay. And could I ask why the UK hasn't, or does the US have similar problems, and why hasn't the UK kind of adopted US practices?
Well, as far as I can see, the US, I haven't. I'll confess that I'm not as well up on the US process as I am on the UK process, but as far as I can see, the US process is still very similar, or the planning and the program for it is very similar. I think they've probably got more money to throw at it than we have in the UK, but I know a lot of their reactors are still above ground, and I don't think it's an easy or a simple program there. But I must, as I say, I'm not an expert on how they're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Chair, just a question to Mr. Sweeney from the ACF. In relation to our current nuclear waste in Australia, have we ever kind of come up with a way to dispose of this nuclear waste that we currently have?
The short answer to a very long story is no. There were 35 years of top-down imposed approach to try and deal with Australia's radioactive waste inventory by locating it at a burial for low level and above ground storage for higher level waste at a regional or rural community centre. There's been multiple fights at multiple sites from unwilling communities. The most recent one was a federal court decision that stood aside former Minister Keith Pitt's decision to advance a facility at Kimber. To the Labor government's credit, they accepted that court decision and have subsequently, we have the bulk of storage is at site of production or use, and mainly that is Australia's intermediate level for extended interim storage at the Anstow facility at Lucas Heights. From ACF's perspective, we believe that's the least worst place for the waste to be managed. It's good institutional security, 24/7 federal police and good emergency monitoring and management capacity. So the least worst place for it to be. And we also avoid transport issues. But the take-home of all of this has been that this is not simple. As Tim G. Jones said, this is not simple. This is highly complicated. There's no easy or clean solutions. And we are deeply concerned, given that in March 2023, Defence Minister Miles said that there would be clarity within 12 months on siting. We're well past that, and we do not know where AUKUS waste is heading. We've heard that it will be on defence, current or future defence estate. That doesn't narrow the field very broadly, and we're very concerned that a defence nuclear regulator coming in less than a month and taking complete control of radioactive safety and radioactive waste issues arising from AUKUS means that a national security lens will be applied and there'll be limited visibility, and we will replicate past mistakes. That's a deep concern, and we're really urging J. Scott to inject a little bit of sanity and scrutiny into the arrangements by making free, prior and informed consent a fundamental guideline moving forward.
Thank you. So just to be clear then, you're saying you're not aware of a plan right now for the disposal of nuclear waste from these submarines, and if there is a plan, it's likely we won't know the details of it.
I'm aware that there's a plan for a controlled industrial facility which has been approved at Henderson for servicing and maintenance waste arising from maintenance servicing for these vessels. That has been approved. That, as I understand it, is low-level waste to be stored there on site pending ultimate removal. There have been plans by a private provider called Talus Holdings, scoping that they can do that storage at a facility called Sandy Ridge near Coolgardie in Western Australia. That opens another series of questions and considerations. In relation to the high-level waste, highly enriched uranium fuel waste, weapons grade and highly dangerous, what's been said is it will be stored on defence, future or current defence estate. But there is so little visibility, so little clarity, and we're deeply concerned that what little there is going to disappear on November 1.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator. We'll now go to the member for Sturt, who has a few questions. And if I could just remind witnesses to keep themselves on mute if they don't have the call, because we do get echoes back and forward. So if you could pop yourself on mute, please. And we'll hear from a few questions now from the member for Sturt. Thank you. Claire.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for being here today and providing the information to the committee. I just have a couple for Friends of the Earth and then a couple for ACF, Chair, if I may. Firstly, Friends of the Earth, I can see in the information that we've been provided that you are making the point that the cost is astronomical of AUKUS, and I think it's described as a waste of resources. So I did wonder what cost would be acceptable to you for a program such as this.
Okay. Dr. Green, do you want to have a go first?
Yeah. Frankly, I'm not sure that anyone could possibly give an answer to that question. Our concerns range far beyond the expense of the project. But if we just keep it to the cost, well, it's noted in the submission of Rear Admiral Peter Briggs that Defence is suffering because of the money that has to be allocated to AUKUS. Other defence projects are suffering. It's inevitable that health and education and everything else that we treasure is going to suffer because of this extraordinary allocation of funding. And I'll just conclude with the thought that there needs to be a serious discussion of alternatives. There obviously wasn't a serious discussion of alternatives in the 24 hours that it took the shadow Labor government to endorse Mr Morrison's AUKUS plan several years ago. Well, better late than never. Now is the time for a thorough-ranging inquiry which costs and assesses the pluses and minuses of every possible or reasonable option that we could go down. And in terms of alternatives, that's firstly alternative submarines, keeping in mind that non-nuclear submarines are vastly cheaper and can probably be delivered more quickly. Secondly, alternative technologies. And thirdly, a more broad-ranging rethinking of a number of the assumptions that underline defence policy in Australia, such as the US alliance. I'm not sure if that answered your question, because I'm not sure that it was an answerable question, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I think you answered a couple of questions there. If I may ask a follow-up, Chair, and just to clarify, thank you. So I'm hearing that the Friends of the Earth doesn't have a sort of firm figure as to what would be an acceptable cost, and I also accept that your concerns in relation to the program go beyond just cost. That is clear. In terms of an alternative, is it the position that Friends of the Earth thinks that diesel-electric submarines is preferable to nuclear-powered submarines? And do you accept that nuclear-powered submarines are a far superior capability from a speed, depth and signature perspective than diesel-electric submarines?
Well, Friends of the Earth wouldn't have a formal position on your first question, but, personally, it seems to me that since the diesel-electric submarines are vastly cheaper and you could get far more of them for considerably less funding, that would seem to be highly advantageous. And my understanding is that if the primary purpose was defence and surveillance, that we would be going down that path, which is diesel-electric submarines for coastal surveillance, whereas the AUKUS program seems to be about fighting alongside the US in a war against China in the South China Sea. And I'm not quite sure how we got to that as being the fundamental premise for Australian defence policy. It's immensely problematic.
I'll just observe that I don't accept that that's the premise of the AUKUS program. For the record, the program is about defence and deterrence, and the nuclear submarine is the single most effective deterrent capability that an island nation like Australia that needs to protect shipping supply routes could have. But I also accept that there are many differing views in relation to that. But thank you for that. And my question to Mr Sweeney, I've just got a couple. Could you just clarify your specific transparency and consistency concerns in relation to the nuclear safety regulator, noting that thus far the regulations that were put out for public consultation did relate primarily to the construction of infrastructure that will be required to facilitate the AUKUS program?
Yeah, thank you there. The concern with the transparency of the regulator is that we have had since the late 90s, a fairly established and generally widely regarded, well-respected civil nuclear regulator in the form of ARPANSA. We then enter into a military nuclear stream, which we haven't had in this country before, and rather than expand ARPANSA's remit, there's a new regulator that's put in train. That regulator is located within Defence. It is answerable and directable by the Defence Minister. And for those reasons, as well as others, we believe that it fails to satisfy the International Atomic Energy Agency's prerequisite of what they term functional separation, clear functional separation, which is effectively independence between the regulator and the agency that is conducting the act that is being regulated. So it is that fox hen house sort of thing, metaphor, that we see as a concern. Another concern is that the public reporting mechanisms, they're quite extensive, and they're on the first read source of some comfort. But towards the end of the extensive list of matters that will be reported is a get out of jail from scrutiny card, if you like, which it says that in the opinion of the Director General of this new agency, should the security of the Commonwealth be in any way affected or impacted by the release of said information, then it shall not be released. Now, that, when you put it in the context that I raised before about the fact that we have, in our country with its democratic processes, not had a full, put the thing on the table and examine it for AUKUS, our biggest ever defence spend with massive geopolitical and domestic implications and costs and opportunity costs, gives us real concern that this regulator will continue to just develop that pattern of secrecy and needs to know, particularly coming from the culture of defence. We've seen that in relation to other things too. We've seen it in relation to PFAS. When Defence initially did PFAS, it took external actors for that to be cracked open. So I imagine they're the sort of considerations we have: the lack of reporting, the lack of functional separation and independence, and the fact that this then will be the primary agency to regulate a set of facts that we do not even have visibility of now. Like what's proposed, where's this waste going to be, how's it going to be handled. We took further concern, and sorry to be long-winded, but we took further concern when the legislation came in, the enabling legislation, the Naval Nuclear Power Safety Act. The original version of that act made it possible for Australia to host all radioactive waste, including high-level radioactive waste from our AUKUS partners. Now, ACF put considerable effort into amending that, and we got a grudging but welcome reduction that it would not include spent nuclear fuel from our AUKUS partners. We'd like to see that wriggle room removed and a very clear case made that Australia does not, and that's what we mean about mission creep, not only nuclear weapons but future nuclear waste. So these things need to be cemented early and best ventilated through an independent assessment and inquiry.
Okay, thank you. That your answer's clear to me. Chair, I had two more questions, but I'm conscious that others have questions. I'm happy to ask my questions or pause and let others have a go.
If that's okay, and we'll come back to you at the end, Member for Sturt.
That's fine.
Thank you so much for your consideration there. We're now going to go to the Member for Lyne. Thank you. Okay, just don't forget to take yourself off mute.
I'm off mute. You can't hear me?
Yeah, we can. Great, go for it.
Thank you. I have a question, please, for Mr. Dear Jones. How does the UK government conduct its radiation monitoring program of nuclear subs in port? And does it report to the Parliament? You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We get a certain amount of reporting from defence nuclear regulators. and the actual sites themselves do a certain amount of their own monitoring of atmosphere, water, and marine sediments and marine plant life and some marine biota in the vicinity of the relevant sites where maintenance and repair take place, and also the storage of the decommissioned submarines. That is reported, and you can access them if you ask for it. There is also a national monitoring system conducted by food, health and food safety agencies and environment agencies in the various devolved parts of the UK, which again monitor the same sort of samples. And I'm sticking to the marine because that's my area. So again, you have sediments, sand and mud, marine sand and mud, marine plant life, and various forms of marine biota, including those shellfish, crustaceans, and sea fish, food species and non-food species, and various forms of marine algae. Our concern is, having realised that you heard me, perhaps you were listening in earlier on when I mentioned the sea to land transfer of radioactivity, which is a significant input which is not regularly monitored in terms of airborne radioactivity blowing ashore from the marine environment. But we do also have monitoring of tide-washed pastures. I don't know how much of that you have in Australia, but in the UK we have tide-washed pastures on which sheep and cattle are kept at intermediate periods. And a lot of salt marsh lamb is considered to be a bit of a dietary delicacy, but it's kind of avoided the issue that those sheep will be eating on tide-washed pastures, and if that's in reasonable striking distance up to 200 kilometres from a nuclear site, they will be consuming radioactivity and bioaccumulating it, which can then be passed on to consumers. Now, as regards to sea to land transfer, when bubbles burst in the surf, those bubbles eject particulate and water droplet radioactivity, which, because it's in very fine form, can blow ashore inland. And as I said earlier on, we have studies in the UK which show that this material can get 10 miles inland and impact itself upon dietary produce grown in agricultural and horticultural units. And that isn't really, hasn't really been taken aboard by the UK nuclear industry or by the UK government environmental monitoring agencies. Now, my reviewing and comments in my report about sea to land transfer actually come from a government nuclear industry sponsored project which discovered that it was happening and noted that there were major processes of magnification in the process of these bubbles being formed and then bursting and then ejecting radioactivity into the air, so that it was shown that materials like plutonium and americium, the heavy-duty alphas, which you don't want to be inhaling or eating, can be enhanced, enrichment factors, EFs as they're called, by many times, and laboratory studies showed that that material could be enhanced or enriched by 500 times, up to 500 times the concentrations found in the ambient seawater from which the radioactivity is derived. So that's a significant issue which is not being monitored or addressed in the UK. I have been advising for several decades that it's something that ought to be taken aboard and addressed, because it's an unknown pathway of exposure by inhalation for coastal populations, by ingestion for people eating produce grown in the 10-mile coastal zone, and by contact, because if it's airborne, then it will be blowing across your skin and touching your skin, and you will be in airborne contact with it if you happen to live in the coastal zone.
Mr. D. Jones, sorry, thank you. Just one last part to this. is your argument that there are natural levels, background levels of cesium and gamma radiation that naturally occur? Are you suggesting that the program, the nuclear subs, are emitting levels beyond what is naturally occurring in the environment? And do you have evidence again to support that?
Well, our government and the nuclear industry reports agree that there is indeed background radiation, and some of it might be gamma and some of it might be beta. But what we're talking about is radionuclides which have never been naturally produced and are produced solely by reactors, and then get into the environment when reactors are operating or being maintained, or that sort of the reactors and their fuel are then transported around the country for disposal, and then are disposed of into unsafe environments. I'm not aware of there being any particularly significant natural forms of cesium. And I mean, I hear the story about bananas and so on, which is frequently bruited about as being a justification for not having to worry about man-made radionuclides. But of course, the human body, in the case of bananas, for instance, the human body naturally ejects most of the potassium-40, the radioactive potassium-40, which it might ingest in bananas, but it doesn't seem to do that so efficiently with plutonium and cesium and cobalt-60 and americium and tritium, the organically bound tritium, the other forms of material which you can find being discharged from submarine bases and waste storage sites.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Chair, can I just note the annual reports provided to the Australian Parliament in relation to previous visits of nuclear-powered submarines, which note background levels of cesium-137 and gamma radiation that are naturally occurring. I'd just like that noted. But thank you, Mr. D. Jones, for your answer.
If I may interject, I don't know that that is naturally occurring. I suspect that most of that is probably from weapons test fallout, which is now globally extant and has been for a long time. Thank you.
Okay. We will be speaking to departments later where we can seek some clarification. With the indulgence of the committee, we've got one member left who would like to ask questions. So I'm hoping our witnesses can stay online for maybe another 10 minutes. And apologies to our next witness who's already joined us. So I'll just hand over to the member for Macon who's got a few questions, and then we'll wrap this session up.
Thank you, Chair. In fact, I have several questions, but I'm going to ask simply two, and I would like a very brief answer if I can. We don't have to go into a lot of detail on it. The two questions are, and I don't mind who can answer them. Has there been any studies into the health effects of naval crews who have served on nuclear submarines? And the second question is, has there ever been a nuclear submarine that was destroyed in battle? And if so, what were the radiation effects, if any, as a result of that?
So I'm just looking, is that something that you wanted to have a crack at, Dave?
Thank you, Chair. I might just start and then hand over possibly to Dr. Green or Tim G. Jones. In relation to destroyed in battle, Mr. Zappia, I'm not aware of any destroyed in battle. There have been a number that have been destroyed or lost in sea, from the Thresher incidents through to Kursk. There's been a number that have been scuttled. And I'm not familiar with the radiological release or the impact of those incidents, but there have been vessels that have been lost. In relation to studies of health effects on naval crews, I'm not familiar with radiation impact effect studies. I am familiar with studies around the increasing concern over mental health and wellbeing from extended periods of tours, and particularly given the Royal Navy is now extending its tours. Used to be 80 days,
sorry,
now
Dave,
they're 200.
Dave, I'm more interested in the radiation.
Well, someone else may have a view on that, Mr. Zappia.
Thank you.
I don't have anything to add, so perhaps Tim D. Jones might.
Thank you, Mr. Dearjones.
Yeah, I don't have much to add on.
Okay.
I don't have much to add on the battle issue, but as mentioned by previous speakers, there have been a number of submarines sunk and lost on the seabed. I have a particular watching brief on the Arctic radioactivity, and I can confirm that some of the Russian submarines which have been lost, complete with their reactors, are being constantly monitored by Norwegian observers, and I was only the other day listening to a Norwegian observer talking about I can't remember which number it is now, but one of the submarines, they've all got K numbers. One of the submarines that they are watching and saying that we are getting to the stage where the reactor casing of that lost submarine is beginning to show signs of decay and corrosion, and they are watching it very carefully because they expect in the relatively near future, next decade or so, to see detectable and significant leaks coming from that reactor and its spent fuel, because the reactor containment compartment has finally begun to corrode.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, again, I'm a bit vague, but I think there are studies from maybe the US actually about the radioactivity impact. But if somebody would like to send me their email address, which I expect you can find, repeating that question, I can go back through my archive and see if I can find that information for them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have reached the end of this section. I've just got a few words to finish this up. I just wanted to say to other committee members, if you did want to ask any of our witnesses any further questions, we can submit them in writing via the Secretariat and pass them on to the people who've been present today who may wish to respond. So that's another option open. But it's been a worthwhile discussion, and I know that the committee members, we've heard lots of different questions today about a broad range of topics. So can I formally thank our witnesses for their attendance today? You'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence, and we'll have the opportunity to request corrections to transcript errors. If you have been asked to provide any additional information, would you please forward to the Secretariat by close of business the 10th of October 2025. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay, moving right along to our next panel, our next witness. I believe, hopefully, Dr. Margaret Bevis is still with us. Fantastic, I can see you there. I now welcome a representative of the Medical Association for the Prevention of War Australia to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you are appearing before the committee?
My name is Margaret Joy Bevis, and I'm appearing as Vice President of the Medical Association for Prevention of War. I've also had some microphone issues. I just wanted to confirm you can hear me clearly.
We can hear you perfectly, so thank you.
Thank you.
Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standings as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false and misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. It is the responsibility of witnesses to accurately record any questions on notice that are taken. Would you like to make an opening statement?
I would, thank you, and many thanks for the opportunity to speak on this topic. The assumptions underpinning this treaty are problematic on so many levels it's hard to know where to begin. Everybody here wants Australian security and Australian sovereignty, but we need a review that's based in Australia's national interest before this treaty goes ahead. The current haste brushes aside an unfolding cascade of problems. For the US and the UK, billions of Australian dollars to support their submarine facilities, and at least 2 submarine bases are clearly a win-win. It is not in the US or the UK national interest to call a halt at this point. The original decision was made in secrecy with very limited technical consultation. There is now huge momentum with many political and business vested interests pushing for this to go ahead. Government and Navy personnel are obliged to support it. Defence has correctly identified this project as high risk. However, there is no Plan B for Australia's future submarine capacity. Indeed, there was no Plan A assessment of our genuine national security threats or how to counter them in a strategic and cost-effective manner. National security should not be used as an excuse to proceed with secrecy. Many experienced defence analysts and expert commentators argue that the AUKUS Pillar 1 project will fail to deliver US submarines at all. In addition, the UK submarines are likely to be massively delayed and over budget. These long-range offensive weapons are designed to be part of US war planning. This escalates tensions in our region, and they are unsuited to defending Australia. The first of the AUKUS UK SSNs are promised for the 2040s. Expert analysis finds there's a 75% chance of them being obsolete by the 2050s. Assertions in this treaty preamble need thorough scrutiny as they are deeply flawed and widely contested, so I'll just run through a few of them. That AUKUS submarines will strengthen military capabilities. For the US subs, how many times does Australia need to be told these submarines will not be available? Realistic assessments of production, major maintenance woes for the Virginia class, and competing US priorities regarding the Columbia SSNs, all combined with the US get-out-of-jail-free legislation that the transfer of such vessels, and I'm quoting, will not degrade the United States' undersea capabilities. We've been told on multiple occasions these submarines are highly unlikely to ever be sold to Australia. Secondly, the UK AUKUS submarine reactor program has been rated as unachievable every year for the last 3 years by the UK government infrastructure watchdog. The current UK SSNs are almost 5 years overdue and massively over budget, and also have major maintenance issues that significantly limit availability for deployment. Thirdly, in the unlikely event that we do get the US and the UK subs, I think you're speaking to Peter Briggs later, he's more expert on this than I am, but deploying 3 different types, 2 different versions of the Virginia, plus the SN AUKUS, is unworkable. Training crews for 3 different subs, maintaining 3 different subs, and having 3 different supply chains make this plan even more unworkable. The number able to be deployed at any one time, 2 at best, will do little to shape the balance of power, and it's widely acknowledged they're too big to defend Australia's northern waters. As noted, these submarines are likely to be obsolete by 2050, if not before, and the extraordinary cost cannibalises Australia's other military capabilities. The next assumption is that they contribute to regional and global security. But being involved in US increased rotational presence increases the risk of Australia being dragged into an unwinnable war with China. It increases the risk of Australia being a target, particularly concerning for port communities. Australia would be much better able to contribute to regional and global security and stability by focusing on diplomacy and working towards prevention of such a war. The next assumption, that these submarines do not present any nuclear proliferation risk and are compatible with the NPT and the Rarotonga Treaty. Acquiring submarines that are each fuelled with between 4 and 20 nuclear weapons worth of directly weapons usable highly enriched uranium sets a dangerous precedent. No matter what safeguard commitments we make, the precedent is there, and a number of countries, including Iran, have flagged they intend to follow this example. The Treaty of Rarotonga, the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty, is also brought into question if nuclear-armed submarines are de facto based in any Australian ports. If Australia is serious about contributing to regional and global security, we should be joining our regional neighbours and signing the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The next flawed assumption is that the submarines bring economic benefit to Australia. We are pouring money into the UK and US economies. The jobs that are so highly touted will be taxpayer funded, narrowly focused, and substitute for other important skilled jobs. There are massive lost opportunities, not just in having military equipment that can actually defend Australia, but also with the loss of skills development, funding and focus on many other critical security priorities, like addressing climate change or homelessness or mental and other health programs. Those are things that would tangibly make Australians much more secure right now. There is a further uncosted and open-ended liability, which is seldom mentioned, although you've just had a session on it, in keeping this secure, this weapons-grade nuclear waste for millennia. So to conclude, these submarines may never appear. Even if they are delivered, they're likely to be very delayed, extremely difficult to man, extremely difficult to maintain, and extremely difficult to deploy. They are clearly not suited to defending Australia, and with the advent of AI and other technologies, they're highly likely to be obsolete by 2050. AUKUS Pillar 1 will leave Australia less able to defend itself and Australians less secure in both the short and the long term. These submarines commit Australia to a US-led military competition with China and further increase our military dependence on the US. They increase the likelihood of Australia being drawn into the next US war. I strongly believe this treaty should not go ahead until there is a full, open and independent inquiry into AUKUS looking at Australian sovereignty as a first criteria. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I just had a couple of questions, just sort of seeking clarification on your statement today, but also to the submission that was made, and then we'll go to other committee members. When we held our first inquiry into the Australia-US, so I guess the sister agreement to this agreement, AUKUS agreement, there was quite a bit of discussion and debate about the term weapons-grade uranium. And the government departments and agencies, the Australian Marine Submarine Agency, and the experts that we had said there's no such thing in this agreement or in what is coming to Australia that we will have weapons-grade uranium. So I just was hoping you could share with us why you believe, or why your organisation believes, that what is in AUKUS does actually demonstrate or reach that bar of, and what your understanding to be of weapons-grade uranium is.
My understanding is that this material is about 93% enriched. The actual composition of the fuel is regarded as one of the jewels in the crown of the US submarine capacity, and so it's highly secret. However, 93% enriched uranium, my understanding is that it's weapons grade. If you wish a more detailed technical answer, I can take that on notice. But basically, this is highly secret, and I understand it's about 93%, and I understand it would not be, that even once these submarines are decommissioned, the waste is still weapons grade and will still need high level security even as waste. So that's, yeah.
Yep. So some of the other evidence that we heard back in that inquiry, and I just wanted to get your view on it, was that because the unit in which the uranium, this higher grade uranium, comes to Australia, it's the fuel capacity, the way it's completely sealed in, it's inserted, it doesn't need to be refuelled in the life of the submarine. Further to that because we are not going down the process of enriching uranium in Australia or reprocessing spent nuclear fuel in Australia as part of AUKUS, it means that we are still consistent with our international obligations around non-proliferation. Is that something that you acknowledge or you would agree with, or is that something that you dispute?
I think what is important is that this is a precedent where a non-nuclear weapon state is acquiring nuclear weapons grade material. And there are other countries such as South Korea, Japan, Pakistan and Iran who've looked at the precedent that Australia is setting and said, yes, we may wish to acquire highly enriched uranium for a submarine program. Now, it doesn't really matter what safeguards Australia undertakes. This material will be on a stealth platform that can disappear for about 6 months at a time. So to say that it can be properly safeguarded is fine on paper, but practically these are stealth vehicles that can disappear for 6 months at a time. And if I'm not saying Australia is going to get nuclear weapons out of these submarines, but I'm saying it's a very bad precedent in terms of non-proliferation. It also runs counter to the Fissile Material Cut-off Treaty, which is a treaty that Australia has worked really hard on, to the extent that the reactor in Sydney, when it was replaced, went from highly enriched to low-enriched uranium fuel. So I think it is, on paper, you can justify it. In the real world, I think it sets a very bad precedent.
Okay, thank you. We'll now go to the member for Sturt, who has a few questions. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Hoping you can hear me all right there. Thank you very much again for being here and sharing your thoughts with us. I think I too echo the Chair's question. I would benefit from some more information about why you say these are nuclear-armed submarines.
Oh, that was a slip of the tongue if I'm saying they're nuclear armed. They're clearly not nuclear armed.
Okay.
They are nuclear fuelled. The fuel itself is an issue, but no, that's a slip of the tongue.
All right, great, thank you. My understanding was it was a nuclear propulsion system, and that's sort of the limitations of the nuclear.
Yes.
Thank you for clarifying that. My other question is, what is the basis of the suggestion that this capability will be obsolete by 2050? And if that is correct, what would you propose we do from a submarine capability perspective?
There's quite, if you look at I'm trying to find the actual page so that I can read you the different sets of research that address this. Certainly there was an ANU study that said that was a 75% chance by 2050 and in fact up to a 90% chance depending on which way you looked at it. Just a moment, I'll get the right section. Okay, so in terms of, there's that ANU study which was in the conversation in 2021, which is referenced in our submission. They said that they felt it was most likely to become transparent by the 2050s and noted that manned submarines are nearing the end of their utility in hostile waters because of developments of smart sea mines, unmanned underwater vehicles and underwater sensors. In addition, China's testing drone-mounted quantum sensor systems that look at the magnetic field, the Earth's magnetic field, and can detect changes such as a large metal object moving deep across the ocean. This is what they're doing now. In the sort of 7 years till we get a US sub, or the 15 or 20 years till we get an AUKUS sub, these detection systems will improve. In addition, there's research showing that the extremely hot water used by the Virginia-class submarine steam engines leaves an infrared signature that can be detected from space. There's also research showing that China has already powerful listening devices in 2 strategic seabed locations deep in the waters near Guam, and that China is currently building the Great Underwater Wall in the South China Sea using a monitoring system of surface and underwater sensors that have passive sonar on the seafloor, and they've also got remotely controlled underwater drones and surface vessels. They're also looking at hydroacoustic sensors that are going to be located on the seabeds at depths of up to 3,000 metres. So there's quite a lot of material suggesting that these submarines, I mean, in 1943, the U-boats of Germany suddenly became obsolete due to changes in technology, and I think it's very optimistic to think there won't be changes in technology regarding these submarines.
Okay, thank you. So it's obsolescence in the sense of not new submarine capability, but alternative uncrewed capability?
Obsolescence in the sense that once these submarines are no longer stealth vehicles, they're obsolete. They'll get destroyed. So yes, I think if Australia was going to, I think Australia is looking at some unmanned underwater vehicles, and I think that's very sensible. You also talked about what would I suggest as an alternative? I would suggest a much smaller submarines that are suitable, much more suited for defence, so more and smaller. And I imagine the committee's heard this stuff before, but there are certainly off-the-shelf submarines that could be built in Australia that would be cheaper, we'd have more of them, and they'd be much better suited to defending Australia.
Okay, thank you. And I had one more, Chair, if I may. Just on the enrichment and weapons grade uranium suggestion. Apologies if I've paraphrased you there. I just did wonder if you were aware of Australia having negotiated the comprehensive safeguards with the IAEA, and that's been happening since 2023. And that will, in fact, include a commitment that the nuclear fuel that we receive as part of the AUKUS SSN-class submarine can't be used in nuclear weapons without any further sort of chemical processing, which is facilities that Australia just does not have yet. And so commitment to non-proliferation will actually be encapsulated in that particular agreement. Is that something that you were aware of and acknowledge?
Yes. When I was at the United Nations in 2022, we talked about this and I met with Australia's non-proliferation representative at the UN. Certainly the paper commitments of Australia are well and good, but the actual, as I said, having this material on a stealth vehicle sets a very bad precedent for non-nuclear weapon states acquiring material that would be much faster to, well, either they gives them justification for having an enrichment program or gives them access to material that would be much more readily transformed into nuclear weapons than otherwise.
But you would accept we don't have the facilities to do that in Australia, and there's no plans.
I don't think Australia has currently the facilities. I would certainly accept that. I do think it's worth remembering that John Gorton, when he wanted to have a nuclear power program, he said that one of the reasons he supported that way back when in Jarvis Bay was that eventually we might want nuclear weapons. I don't in any way suggest that Australia's going to do that, but I do think if Australia suddenly changed its mind, heaven forbid, these submarines would make it a much easier proposition.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and our final questions for this session will come from the member from Macon, unless we've got any others putting their hand up. But thank you, member.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Beavis, in your address earlier on, you said something along the lines, and I might be paraphrasing you a little, that climate change poses the major threat to our future security. But and you also said, and therefore that the money could be better spent on addressing climate change issues. A moment ago, you talked about other submarines that could be a better option to the nuclear submarines. Is it your position that we shouldn't be spending any money on submarines ahead of addressing climate change and other social areas? Or are you suggesting that, yes, we should have submarines, but the nuclear submarines is not the best option? And I have another question after that one.
It's a complicated question. There's a few questions within that, so I probably might miss some. Tell me if I miss some of the questions that you've got. I think Australia needs to be able to defend itself.
Yep.
I think it doesn't need highly enriched uranium if it wants to have nuclear propulsion. If it wants to have nuclear propulsion subs, it should be looking at the low enriched uranium versions that both China and the French use. Do I think we need nuclear propelled subs? I think we would be better off with, as many other countries have, submarines that are better suited for defence rather than long-range attack vehicles. I think these submarines... What's really interesting when I was doing my research for this was actually how the maintenance difficulties of these submarines. These are very, very big, complicated objects, and both the US and the UK are having significant problems with operational availability. I know I'm digressing a bit, but in terms of actually being able to defend something, you have to... There's no point having a Ferrari if you can't get it out of the garage. And both the US and UK are facing major maintenance issues. And I think it's one, regardless of the number of submarines that are manufactured, I think one of the biggest reasons we won't get these US subs is because they've got, I think, about 1/3 of the fleet are out of action at any one time because they're of maintenance issues. One of the heads of the program said that because there were so many problems with the Virginia maintenance, they were going to focus on having better maintenance for the next submarine they built.
Okay.
But as I said, in terms of climate change, what do I think? I think the budget here is so great that I think we could have submarines and work on climate change.
Okay.
Just smaller submarines for defence and some work on climate change.
Thank you. That answers that. You also said that we may be dragged into a war with China, or again, words to that effect. Why?
Yes.
What makes you so confident to say that? Or why do you believe that that would be the case?
It's useless. These submarines are pretty useless. These submarines are designed ostensibly as hunter-killer submarines to either work to blockade the South China Sea, is my understanding, or to go into the depths of the Mariana Trench and try and find Chinese nuclear submarines. That's my understanding, but everybody's so secretive about this. That's my understanding. Why do I think we get dragged into a US-China conflict? Because we will have bases where US submarines are, I think the long run, we will have US submarines coming to bases on the east and west coast of Australia. We have Pine Gap, we have Northwest Cape, we have multiple other US bases. We are increasingly dependent on the US militarily. These submarines make us even more dependent on the US militarily. And I think a little bit of reflection on Australia having a supply chain of its own for submarines that are off the shelf, that are much better suited to defence, would keep Australia much safer than having a few of these very long-range aggressive submarines.
Dr. Beavers, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your attendance today. That brings us to the end of our questions. Thank you very much for the way in which you've contributed to this discussion. You will be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence, and we'll have an opportunity to request any corrections to transcript errors. If you have been asked to provide any additional information, would you please forward to the Secretariat by close of business on the 10th of October 2025. So thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you. Thank you for having.
Okay, we will now bring forward and move into our next session where we will be hearing from Serco Asia Pacific. So please come forward. I would now like to welcome a representative from Serco Asia Pacific to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your name and the capacity in which you are appearing before the committee?
My name is Lucy Hannon, Director of People and Capability within Serco Defence, Serco Asia Pacific. I'm also currently the Acting Managing Director for the Defence part of our business.
Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standings as the proceedings of respective houses. The giving of false and misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded in Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. It is the responsibility of witnesses to accurately record any questions on notice that are taken. Would you like to make an opening statement?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Proceed.
Thank you. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. Serco is a long-standing partner delivering defence capability to governments in the United Kingdom, Australia and the United States, and so we are strongly committed to effective bilateral and trilateral partnerships between our allied nations. Part of my role at Serco is managing our specialised defence workforce across and between these jurisdictions to support the needs of our defence partners. I have been with Serco for 11 years and in that time dealt with a range of issues on this front that I hope may be of use to the committee's review. Serco strongly supports the ratification of the nuclear-powered submarine partnership and collaboration agreement and commends the government for embedding workforce provisions into this treaty. This shows foresight in recognising that one of Australia's greatest challenges in delivering AUKUS is not technical or financial, it is people. The workforce challenge is acute. Australia must rapidly grow sovereign capacity in design and acquisition, nuclear stewardship, specialist engineering, nuclear platform integration, advanced trades, sustainment and supply chain management. Without strong and swift action, we risk serious delays, capability gaps, and the very real prospect of repeating the challenges faced by the United States Navy on the readiness of its SSNs, one of the challenges AUKUS aims to address. The government has already taken significant steps to address these challenges, increasing STEM places, establishing a skills task force, and investing in training academies. These initiatives are welcome and will deliver well-paid, highly skilled jobs for Australians, but their benefits will take time to fully materialise. What is needed now is a way to quickly muster expertise, transfer skills, and build sovereign capacity. Without this, we risk delays in delivery that could ultimately undermine AUKUS Pillar 1. To address this, our submission proposes two complementary streams of effort. The first priority is a government-led framework to tackle the regulatory barriers that prevent fast, predictable workforce mobility. While some existing visas, for example, for specialist skills or in-demand roles might suit on a case-by-case basis, the system as it stands is highly complex. It is fragmented with significant friction, inconsistent outcomes, and no central visibility of the workforce pipeline. This approach is not suited to moving significant numbers of highly skilled submarine and maritime specialists quickly, reliably, and strategically in the national interest. To address this, a dedicated AUKUS skills visa would provide a better approach. It would allow government to work with industry to identify priority roles and skills, streamline processing, and centrally manage workforce flows to achieve the necessary national strategic effect. Equally important is the issue of security clearances. With subject matter this sensitive and in a deteriorating threat environment, we cannot and should not weaken standards. But in order to successfully deliver the submarine programme, the process needs to work better. At present, uniformed personnel can access local waivers when serving in partner nations, but foreign private sector employees cannot, despite already holding comparable clearances at home, meaning they face months or even sometimes years of duplicate vetting, months or years we simply do not have time to spare. In fact, in some instances, local clearances may even be completely inaccessible to some unless they renounce their original citizenship. This slows the mobilisation of critical expertise precisely where it is most needed. A trilateral mechanism for clearance recognition or transfer would maintain strong security standards while reducing unnecessary duplication and causing unacceptable delays to delivery. Coupled with credential recognition and central coordination, these measures would give practical effect to the NPSPCA's provision on personnel exchange and governance. The second priority is a practical public-private workforce exchange between AUKUS nations. Once the government's enabling framework is in place, we should operationalise it through structured programmes that embed allied experts here in Australia and send Australians abroad into mature submarine enterprises in the UK and US. This two-way flow could provide immediate uplift, accelerate skills transfer and ensure knowledge comes home to seed sovereign capability, growing our workforce base and delivering well-paid jobs for Australians over the long term. Taken together, these measures would ensure that workforce challenges do not become barriers or bottlenecks, but instead become a source of strength and certainty in Australia's contribution to AUKUS. A recent report by the Centre for Strategic and International Studies points out that Australia's submarine maintenance facility at HMAS Stirling could contribute 1,800 maintenance days over 5 years to the proposed US submarine rotational force. In 2022, the US Navy reported that the US attack submarine force had about 1,100 days of maintenance delays and backlog. This is a prime example of how Australia can make a real contribution to support our strategic partners' needs to bolster allied presence and security in our region, while at the same time growing local jobs and industry. Our proposed approach is consistent with the position of Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister, the Honourable Richard Marles, who has said, I quote, "We need to be looking at ways in which we can have an easier facilitated movement of people between our three countries who are working on this programme." We completely agree, and the two streams of effort we are proposing will help achieve that. Importantly, these solutions must apply not only to defence and ADF personnel, but also to the private sector workforce associated with this programme, because it will be private engineers, trades, sustainers, logisticians and supply chain professionals who will design, construct, integrate, maintain and ultimately sustain this capability day to day. In practice, the majority of the submarine enterprise will rest on the shoulders of private industry. Without deliberate inclusion of industry in visa clearance and credentialing reforms, we risk creating a two-tier system in which uniformed personnel can move quickly through established pathways, while civilian workforce that delivers the bulk of capability is slowed down by duplication, fragmentation and red tape. That is why a centralised national coordination is essential. We recommend the establishment of an AUKUS Workforce Steering Committee to bring together Defence, the Australian Submarine Agency, Home Affairs, industry partners and representatives of allied governments. Such a body would ensure that workforce mobility is managed strategically and not piecemeal, with a clear view of demand. Streamlined visa and clearance processes and also accountability for outcomes. Crucially, it would also provide transparent reporting to Parliament and the public, reinforcing trust that Australia is not only acquiring submarines, but building the sovereign human capital required to operate and sustain them. Chair, members, the AUKUS workforce challenge is substantial, but it is solvable. The NPS-PCA gives us the framework by creating the right enabling visa, clearance and credentialing pathways, and by coupling these with practical workforce exchanges, we can ensure both defence and industry are mobilised as equal partners. If undertaken with speed and in partnership, this will build a sovereign workforce capable of delivering and sustaining nuclear-powered submarines for generations to come. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much. I have a few questions before we go to our other committee members. And thank you for making a submission to this inquiry. In the first inquiry that we had into the Australia-US agreement, we did focus a lot on skills and our domestic capability, and so it's really important to us that we're also looking at what it means for the private sector as well as the public sector. So I guess if we could just start there first of all. Serco is a really large company, and a lot of Australians probably don't know the full extent of the the defence side. They might tend to think of Serco more as cleaners, security officers, people who sort of maintain bases. Could you just give us an insight to the kind of roles that you think that we don't have the skills for domestically here in Australia to fulfil?
Yeah, sure. So in summary, nuclear stewardship and safety. So we have extremely limited cadre of naval nuclear engineers, radiological control technicians or regulators. There's a shortage of submarine qualified naval architects, system engineers and trades such as the specialists, welding, electrical fitters, etc., etc. Maintainers in reactor safety, specialist welding, radiological controls. They're just some of the initial ones, but I could provide you with more detail after this, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Can I then just go to, with the AUKUS skills visa that you're proposing and sort of having a workforce exchange program, is there something similar being considered in those other jurisdictions, so the UK and the US? And would there be an expectation that it'd be like for like, or would it have to be individually negotiated in each of those countries?
I think the proposal, the concept that we're proposing is that we would have a centralised committee who would set the rules and parameters around this programme, the AUKUS visa programme and the clearance the streamlining of the baseline clearance programme. So I think that would need to be developed over time. However, the concept of what we're talking about is sharing of skills and capability resources as needed to support all of the three nations in achieving the objectives.
Oh, look, and I can appreciate that the challenges that Serco would have. Like Australia is a country of choice, a destination to work, to visit. Our Department of Immigration processes hundreds of thousands of visas every year. Not all of them are skill-based visas, majority being, tourist visas and international student visas. So I guess the next question is where are the blockages for the private sector in terms of skills? Like, what current visa would your workforce be applying to work under if they wanted to work in Australia, but they had those challenges around visa entry and clearances?
So we currently have I can give you a practical example. We currently have a contract out at HMAS Watson in New South Wales where we recruit and we provide the simulation training to Navy. That is a real scarce skill for us and for Australia. So we have worked with the Department of Home Affairs to have a specialised approach to visas for two specific positions within that contract. There just aren't the skill sets and the people with those skill sets within Australia, so we need to recruit from the UK or North America or New Zealand. So we've had the Global Talent Employer Nomination Scheme granted to Serco, which provides an easier pathway for those individuals to come into Australia and deploy their knowledge into that contract.
And is that more of a training capacity so that therefore they're training up local people to be able to do that job into the future?
It's training for naval personnel.
And so the idea behind this AUKUS skilled visa, would it be just as a training capacity, or would you see it being more, I guess, a bit beyond that and a bit more like your traditional skilled visa in that we couldn't find anyone locally to do the job, so we've recruited internationally for that position?
Correct, yes. It would definitely, or the concept that we have is that it would be for positions that were really hard to fill within Australia. Therefore, we would go abroad, find those skill sets from partner nations, bring them into Australia, credential them really quickly because in theory they should have similar clearances, so get them productive as soon as possible. Also in terms of developing local Australians, one concept that we had around this was to include as part of the visa criteria that these individuals would need to spend some time working with a local engineering college or spend a certain number of hours helping develop local Australians, and also possibly have a time limit on the visa so that we know that they're going to go home. So they'll come over, deploy the expertise, also kind of seed out the expertise in Australia, and then there's a commitment to go home.
So I was just going to ask that, time frames, time limits on this visa, what's your thinking around that?
Probably something around about initial 4 years as a placement with a potential to extend, but then kind of a drop dead at the end of that period where they would return home. I think that's enough time to fulfil a role here, but also leave a legacy as well and develop local Australians in whatever skill sets it may be.
I mean, people, are people, they might come here, set down roots here. Do you also see this visa as potentially having a pathway to permanent residency? Like some of the other visas that have been talked about publicly have talked about pathways to permanent residency. Do you see that being an aspect of this visa?
I think that's up for debate because the purpose or the concept that we're discussing is about real skills shortages for a specific purpose. So I think it's up for debate as to whether there would be a route to PR or not. I think on the one side, I think no, people should come here, take the opportunity to come here and know that they're going back to whichever country, say the UK. But on the other side, I do understand that Australia is an attractive place to live and people want to set down roots here. So I'm not sold either way on that at the moment. I still think it's up for debate.
And how many visas are we talking about? Sometimes when we have industry come and pitch to us, hey, we want this visa, they're talking about hundreds of thousands of visas, like the agriculture visa, for example. How many do you think we would need or would be looking at in relation to this specific AUKUS skilled visa?
Again, I'm sorry to give you I think it depends answer, but I think until we really get into the detail of the proposed workforce plan across the partner nations, then that's a difficult question to answer. What I would say is I would see this AUKUS visa as something that is only tagged to the highly skilled roles. So not everybody within the AUKUS programme would be eligible for one of these visas. It's more about the specialist skill that we need.
Yep. I'm just going to jump to the member for Macon who has some questions, and he gets second go because he's sitting right next to me. But I just did want to give the call out to any other committee members just to message me or let us know via the hands up function if they've got questions. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Ms Annan. Can I just clarify, does Serco have a role in the construction of nuclear submarines in the UK? And if so, what is that role?
To my knowledge, no. I haven't worked for the Serco part of the business in the UK. I've worked in the Australian part of the business. So to my knowledge, no. I can come back with clarity on that for you if needed.
Okay. And just to follow up from the Chair's questions, what role, apart from training, do you see that Serco might have with respect to the AUKUS contract here in Australia?
So we run various different defence contracts within Australia, so training is a part of that. We operate... I can give you a whole list of the projects that we operate.
I know what Serco generally does, but I'm trying to narrow it down to, as a private company, what its role would be in the AUKUS agreement. And would that not be the case even if it was a different type of submarine that was being built?
I probably can't give you specifics on that today, unfortunately, but I can come back to you with a more thorough answer to that question, if that's okay, and take it on notice. Yeah,
sure.
Thank you.
Again, getting back to the Chair's questions about the visa, do you know if there is a similar visa arrangement with any other country at the moment?
I don't know about specific arrangements. I do know the US have a L1B visa, which is aimed at very specialist, high-level skills being deployed into that region. The UK has something very similar as well. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I know those kind of visas do exist. They're more broader, though. They're not tagged to a specific project.
Right.
So I think this would probably be one of the first of its kind.
Now, Serco has a number of contracts with the government here in Australia. The current visa arrangements, do they allow for overseas employees to come in? And the Chair was talking about the skilled visa program we have. And if so, what kinds of problems do you see with the current arrangements that would be overcome with your proposal?
Yes. So yes, we do recruit individuals in from the UK, New Zealand, North America into work within some of our projects. I think some of the problems with the existing visa processing arrangements are that it's very piecemeal in terms of job criteria. These are the documents you need, and then we'll apply for the visa. So it can be quite complex when you're recruiting for lots of different roles with lots that require lots of different skill sets. Visa processing times can be quite challenging to manage from a organisational perspective as well. And I think once the AUKUS programme really kicks into gear, we do risk having a lot of clogging, our systems being clogged up with hundreds and hundreds of visa applications for specific roles, whereas I think if we have this AUKUS visa, it would hopefully mean that things can go through smoothly, still with the same checks and balances, but with the understanding that it's for this specific project, therefore it's in this category, this swim lane, and hopefully things should move through a lot quicker.
And lastly, and I'll use the UK as an example, if you were to bring in people from the UK, is it your view that the skills that would be required here in Australia and that might be in short supply are in abundance in the UK, or would you be creating a shortage over there by bringing people from over there to here?
It's probably a bit of both, to be brutally honest, and that's where the workforce plan comes in. So the centralised workforce committee that's in our briefing document that we're proposing. I think once you've got a strong workforce plan, then you can work out those challenges in terms of where the skill sets are and where they need to be deployed to. And within any organisation without a workforce plan, you're kind of running a little bit blind.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's pretty much all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next questions are from the member for Lyons. So take it away. Thank you, Alison.
Great. Thank you very much. I want to focus on the exchange program, because it seems to me the pathway where we're investing, particularly in Australians, in gaining expertise necessary for AUKUS. And I had a look at the report that was written for the previous committee's previous review of the treaty with the US on this, and there does have some exchange type programs in it. Firstly, do you think there is a lot more capacity with our partners to go hard in terms of an exchange program, particularly given the time frame we're talking for serious need for expertise on the ground here?
Yeah, I mean, I think an exchange program benefits everybody, in terms of building that capability that we don't have in Australia. You're sending individuals to different parts of the globe to get that expertise and those skills and then bring them back with them to Australia. So I do feel an exchange program, a well-managed exchange program with parameters and et cetera, set around it, is a positive for everybody. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, and of course, I mean, we've got, I guess there's three streams. There's defence personnel, Department of Defence, officers, and then the private sector. Do you have any views on, how we would be best to prosecute the development of a wholesome exchange program across those three streams?
I think remove the barriers to exchange would probably be a really important part of that. So, as I mentioned in my opening comments, enabling private sector employees with the same credentials as a uniformed personnel to move around that exchange programme freely within the realms of the structure that's been set, I think would be a real advantage. Otherwise, you do create a two-tier system where you have individuals kind of sat being unproductive, waiting for clearances, et cetera, to get to work before they can get to work in wherever they've been sent to. So my view is, I think, is whatever is developed, as long as it is developed with a view that the three kind of parties are all the same, working towards the same goal, and therefore working within the same rules.
Is the security clearance issue the really challenging one in terms of private sector?
Yeah, it can be. So it can take a significant amount of time to get a security clearance for somebody who has the equivalent clearance in the UK, for example. But over here, it can take a significant amount of time. And I would imagine, and I don't know for certain, but I would imagine it's very similar across in the UK. So I think some thought around those security clearance processes for this specific project, not to water anything down, but just to make it a bit more streamlined would certainly be helpful.
I mean, in your experience in terms of security clearance in the UK versus Australia, what's the time difference?
I don't have experience of the UK. Apologies, I've been out of the UK for a number of years, so apologies, I can't answer that question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to the end of our questions. So thank you for your evidence here today. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence, and we'll have an opportunity to request corrections to any transcript errors. If you have been asked to provide any additional information or have offered to provide it, please forward to the Secretariat by close of business, 10th of October 2025. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your time.
Great, and we already have our next witness online, so we will proceed to our panel number 4. And someone who we've already heard about quite extensively in our previous discussions. So I'd now like to welcome Rear Admiral Peter Briggs to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you are appearing before us? Just wait for him to log on. We are a few minutes early, so we'll just wait. Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'll start that again. I now welcome Rear Admiral Peter Briggs to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you are appearing before the committee? Just going to confirm if Mr. Briggs can hear us. We can see you, but we can't hear you. Okay, we're just going to work through this IT issue. It won't be a few moments. I'm not sure he can hear us either. Yeah. You can stay online and still do it.
Okay, how's...
Great, we can...
I think.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you for that, Rear Admiral. So if you could, for the Hansard record, please state your full name and the capacity in which you are appearing before the committee.
Did that work?
Yes, it did. Can you hear us?
Don't think he can.
I'm just wanting to confirm, Mr. Briggs, can you hear us? Doesn't appear that you can. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but I'm not sure you can hear us.
I can see, but I cannot hear the chair speaking.
He can't hear me. So.
Now that I've turned the speaker up, maybe I can.
All right, can you hear us now?
Yes.
Great, fantastic, excellent. It's WebEx isn't always my friend either. So I would now like to invite the Rear Admiral Peter Briggs to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you are appearing before the committee?
Rear Admiral Peter Briggs, RAN retired, and I appear as a knowledgeable, I hope, but private citizen.
Thank you. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false and misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded in Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. It is the responsibility of witnesses to accurately record any questions on notice that are taken. Would you like to make an opening statement before we proceed to discussion?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Please proceed.
I'd like to outline my relevant experience prior to commenting briefly on the treaty. On completion, I look forward to your questions. In 1967, following 2 years training with the Royal Navy as a sub-lieutenant, I underwent initial submarine training in the UK. I volunteered for submarines. Many of my Royal Navy peers, the best and brightest from my year, were drafted to provide the manpower for the UK's transition to nuclear-powered attack and Polaris ballistic missile submarines. Following short training, I joined HMS Otter, a British Oberon-class submarine for sea training and qualification. Although I was a trainee, I was employed as a torpedo officer for a short period before taking over as the navigation officer when that officer was posted to nuclear training at short notice. Manning was tight. I was awarded the Max Horton Prize for the top submarine graduate in my year. It was a steep learning curve. At 22, I was navigating a British submarine in the Atlantic and Mediterranean during the Cold War. I stood by our third Oberon, HMAS Ovens, being built in Greenock, Scotland. As the navigating officer, I went through the post-build contractor sea trials, operational workup and return voyage to Australia. I made my way up the career ladder to pass the UK's Submarine Commanding Officers course, the Perisher, in 1975, subsequently commanding HMAS Otway and Oxley. In 1980, I was promoted to commander and spent 5 rewarding years as the director of the Submarine Warfare Systems Centre, overseeing a brilliant team of Australians introducing the first digital fire control system, new sonars, new weapons, the Mark 48 torpedo and Harpoon missile, into the RAN's submarines. I was awarded an AM for this service. Following this job, on promotion to captain, I served as the commanding officer of Australia's submarine squadron, overseeing operations of the RAN's 6 Oberon-class submarines. The senior submarine specialist policy position, the Director of Submarine Policy and Warfare in Canberra, followed. Following this appointment, I moved out of the submarine arm, serving as the Naval Officer commanding Western Australia and Commanding Officer HMAS Stirling in 1991 as a Commodore. I was awarded a Conspicuous Service Cross for this service. On promotion to Rear Admiral in 1993, I served as the Naval Training Commander and then oversaw Defence Operations as the Assistant Chief for Defence Force Operations in Canberra. I was awarded an AO during this service. My final appointment was as the head of the Submarine Capability Team, resolving the first-of-class issues with the Collins-class submarines and successfully delivering 2 fast-track submarines on time and budget. I received a jointly signed commendation from the Minister, CDF, Secretary, Under-Secretary for Defence Materiel
and Chief of Navy for this service. Since retiring from the REN in 2001, I've been an active commentator on submarine matters. I served as the President of the Submarine Institute of Australia 2006-2009. In 2013-15, I undertook an 18-month study into the personnel aspects of a transition to nuclear-powered submarines. This included examining how the French, UK and US navies manage the training and manning of their submarine capabilities. The report was purchased by the Department of Defence and has not been published. Drawing on this experience, I published an ASPE Special Report number 129, Can Australia Afford Nuclear-Powered Submarines? Can we afford not to? In October 2018. I apologise for all that first-person pronouns. The point I wish to make is that I have experienced the challenges of sustaining a UK-designed submarine on an overseas supply chain. I've also seen what a transition to nuclear-powered submarine looks like and experienced the difficulties of introducing a new design submarine into service. As I have argued in my submission, the optimum pathway we are embarked on to transition to nuclear-powered submarines is seriously flawed. Australia should be urgently implementing Plan B to avoid the issues inherent in this plan. Against this backdrop, if Australia is to continue with this flawed plan, I have serious concerns with the treaty now before the committee, as I've set out in my submission. Australia should not sign a treaty which seriously limits its own commercial rights. There is no minimum protection in the treaty for a guaranteed work share for genuine Australian industry. A minimum level should be mandated, as was done and achieved for the Anzac and Collins projects. The Collins project has established a viable submarine supply chain within Australia. We should build on this, not sign a treaty mandating it out of existence. Depending on an overseas supply chain for such a critical capability as our submarines are, is a folly. Australia must be able to insist on design features critical to our environment and needs. A system of independent arbitration to resolve differences should be included in the treaty. And finally, wider public consultation is essential to obtain a social licence for this project. Bear in mind, the UK submarine enterprise is in the hands of two monopoly suppliers, BAE Systems designing and building the submarines, and Rolls-Royce building the reactors. This is not a competitive marketplace, nor has the UK government managed to control their costs. In the case of the Astute class, paying huge price hikes for very expensive, slowly built SSNs. The latest Astute class, HMS Agamemnon, commissioned on 22nd of September this year by His Majesty King Charles III. It took over 12 years to reach this point. I have to observe why you would name a British SSN after a mythological character from Greek mythology, infamous for sacrificing his daughter, who was in turn murdered by his wife and her lover, eludes me. There are indications that Australia holds significant sway in finalising this agreement. Agamemnon was commissioned early. She has yet to complete contractor sea trials and a final build docking to rectify defects found. It will be upwards of another 18 months before she is in service, close to 14 years to build. I suggest the event, bolstered by the King's boost for AUKUS in his speech to President Trump, was staged to provide regal support and, quote, a good news, unquote, story in the run-up to a visit by an erstwhile Republican Australian Prime Minister, whose heroic reception at number 10 Downing Street and the UK Labor Party conference adds weight to my theory. The commissioning also highlights the likely delay to SSN AUKUS, now in a queue behind the remaining Astute and 4 Dreadnought-class SSBNs, which are over twice their size and more complex. I'm not an economist, contract or legal specialist, but I suggest the committee should use this sway and seek such special advice before signing Australia up to this unequal treaty. Finally, I return to my objections to this flawed plan. We should avoid binding Australia to the morass that is the UK's submarine enterprise. I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much for that. We might jump first of all to Senator that we've got online. I'm going to shake things up a bit and hear from committee members first. So take it away, Senator. Senator Peter Wishford-Shawes. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Admiral, I was lucky enough a few years ago to go on a Collins-class submarine when it came to Beauty Point in Tasmania, and we had a family member on the submarine, and I got to meet some of the crew. And what surprised me was how many of the crew had done foreign service and had been recruited to join the Navy as submariners. How challenging is it going to be to staff these submarines if we get them, and including in the maintenance of these submarines?
I think it's a major challenge, and it's made more difficult by the size of the crew. A nuclear-powered submarine is quite different in manning compared to Collins. In Collins, for example, you had a qualified commanding officer. The second in command received a basic level of training to allow him to bring the submarine home if something happened to the commanding officer, but he's not a qualified commanding officer. A nuclear-powered submarine in the Royal Navy, and I assume in the Royal Australian Navy, has 2 qualified commanding officers. So straight away you've doubled the number of that specialist that you require. Collins has 1 marine engineer officer. A nuclear-powered submarine has 5. And the process to become the chief engineer on a nuclear-powered submarine takes something like 16 years from starting in initial submarine training. So the skills mix is quite different. We obviously don't have nuclear technicians in Collins, and you have a crew there of 58. Astute is something in the order of 100. Virginia, if we ever get them, is 132. I don't know what SSN AUKUS will require, but somewhere north of 100 seems reasonable. So we're going to have to double the size of the submarine arm, and we're going to have to find those specialist skills. In the case of Collins, we have 6, and I would say we are at or below critical mass. In other words, we do not generate enough potential new commanding officers out of 6 submarines. We get by hiring, by engaging UK Royal Navy submarine CEOs. And so if you go to around the Collins force, you'll find some English accents in there. That is a problem with the plan we're now heading for, where we're planning to buy 8 SSNs. That is also below critical mass. And my number, looking at the manning in that study I mentioned, you need at least 10. In a strategic setting for a country the size of Australia, you need 12. And that was accepted in the 2009 white paper. So they're all elements of why I think the current plan has got some serious practical flaws in it.
You mentioned there, if we get the Virginia class SSNs, in the meantime we have, we're looking at 15 years or so for the UK submarines. There'll be a capability gap that these Virginia-class subs are meant to fill. Why do you have doubts that we'll get the US submarines?
The US is already short of SSNs. It has a target of 66. It has 47 today, made up of 20 elderly Los Angeles-class submarines, which are having to be retired as they reach the end of life. The reactor life is the primary driver. They're retiring faster than the US is able to build replacement Virginia-class. their objective was to build 2 a year. Over the last 21 years of the program, they've managed 1.1. So they are basically 18 submarines short of where they predicted to be at this point. And their efforts to increase the output have not been successful. The problem is going to be made more difficult for them because they have the priority for their building yards, and they only have 2 building yards, is the Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine, which is a huge 20,000-ton submarine. They're planning to build 12 of them, and they are the first priority. The yards have already reported they're diverting workforce off Virginia and onto Columbia to try and maintain that schedule. In addition to the shift to the bigger Columbia as the priority, they're changing the size of the Virginia. So it's going from 7,800 tonnes up to over 10,000 tonnes. That is going to take longer to build. So the yards, not only are they not building them quick enough to meet their 2 a year demand, and well, they have a gap, but every effort they make and every success they have in increasing, that's going to be absorbed by the bigger Columbia building line, which is now hitting its stride, 1 a year. There's 12 of those to build, 3 of them laid down, 9 more to come. So it's quite a long program in front of us. The legislation passed by Congress covering the sale of the submarines says that in 2031 a decision has to be made by the President of the day on the basis that selling us 3 to 5 Virginias will not reduce the US Navy's submarine capability. And I see no feasible way why that is going to be, why the President would be able to certify that. He's 18 short and he's going to fall further behind between here and there.
So if this capability gap is inevitable then, because of complications with getting the Virginia-class subs, is Australia's existing Collins-class submarines going to be able to fill that gap for another 10, 15 years?
That's anyone's guess.
Right. Okay. What's your guess? You've got the experience.
My guess is we'll have problems extending them. And as they were designed for 25 years, we're now going to extend them by another 10 to 35. There'll be a whole bunch of things that we do not know about that are going to pop up and cause problems. And no one will know about that until it happens. All the reasons that I advocate we should be looking for Plan B here.
Okay. And would Plan B mean ordering or building something for the short to medium future as well as the long-term future, rather than relying on 10,000-tonne SSN AUKUS subs that I think I picked up in your opening statement you feel like aren't necessary?
Yes, my submission to the committee covers this in more detail. I think we should be looking at a submarine that's in production, not a new design, which SSN AUKUS is, and one that we can much more readily cost and plan and schedule so that we have a replacement as we start to lose the Collins in 2038. That would either be, and I should make the point, again, it's in the submission, that the current plan envisages we will have 2 second-hand Virginias and 1 new build. So we have 3 Virginias, but they're not the same. The second-hand ones will come with 15 years life left in the reactor. The new one will come with 33 years, but it will have different designs. It's a Block 7. It's we've yet to see the details of it, but the components of that will be different. The pump might be different. The periscopes might be different. Whole bunch of possibilities. So 2 different versions of Virginia, and then 5 of SSN AUKUS when it finally arrives. That is an impossible equation for a navy as small as Australia, trying to operate two different versions of the Virginia and a completely different design from the Brits. Different standards, different schedules.
Okay. Last question for me, Chair, but I know you've probably got lots of other senators who want to ask questions. Yeah, but obviously air warfare is being revolutionised by autonomous drones, and now we're all grappling with the applications of AI, artificial intelligence, in just about all parts of our lives. I understand the ASA in Australia is building an autonomous AI-generated, or AI not generated, but AI functional submarine. Have you got any comments about the future of submarine warfare with this kind of technology and with underwater drones?
Yes. Firstly, the environment underwater is much more challenging than through air. And yeah, I accept your premise, your point about the rapid developments in these areas. But we will find, I think, predictions that the oceans will be transparent by 2070 or something have been a bit ambitious. The practical world is not that easy. And getting the range into a small mobile platform is also not easy. I think you will find that manned submarines will still be around for a long time. They will be using unmanned underwater drones to extend, and above water drones to extend their reach and provide information for them. So they complement each other. They do not replace each other.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, next we'll go to the member for Hasluck with some questions. Thank you. Okay, we just need to take ourselves off mute.
Is that working now?
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And firstly, thank you, Rear Admiral, for your lifetime of service to our country and for your ongoing focus and study to bring your experience to bear in this context too. I just wanted to pick up a little further on where Senator Whish-Wilson was going in regards to where you see some of the limitations of the treaty in terms of the delivery of the boats. So what protections do you think should be included in the agreement then to ensure that Australia's interests are safeguarded from that, from the event of delay, or there might be design failures, I think you were referencing as well. So what protections do you believe should be included in the agreement?
As I've said in my submission, I think we need the ability, firstly, to mandate Australian industry participation. We did this very successfully in Collins and the ANZAC projects. As a result, Collins suppliers, a Swedish submarine builder, and the various subsystem suppliers were forced to find Australian partners and to set up a capability in Australia. And today, over 90% of the funds spent by ASC in sustaining Collins are spent in Australia. So we have a submarine support capability in Australia. We should be using it. That should be set up in the treaty so that we're not vulnerable to BAE systems and the UK priorities in deciding where we get the components for the submarines from.
And would you define a floor? Like, would there be a minimum level to guarantee that Australian local content?
In Collins, we asked for 60%, and we got more than that. SSN AUKUS is to be nuclear powered, and we don't have a nuclear industry, so that's one component that we have to import. You would still, I suggest, be able to mandate a level of Australian support to be set up by the supplier of the reactor. It would be inappropriate and foolish to rely on air connections and Rolls-Royce UK coming out to sort out any problems with the reactor, for example.
So if I can just point you to Article 2, Part B, which provides that the parties will develop the personnel, workforce, infrastructure and regulatory systems necessary for Australia to produce, operate, sustain and steward a sovereign SSN capability. Does that not give you sufficient comfort that that is in fact the intention, to drive a local industry, and as evidenced also by the defence precincts we're building and creating that capability with businesses, in particularly WA and South Bay?
Yeah, no, I do have concerns. I think that's a best effort type clause, and I think we ought to be mandating making it that a much more emphatic condition of the treaty.
Okay. And you think then that by putting in a floor, specifying a floor, it would help to support the development of Australia's sovereign capability? Absolutely.
It's been done twice successfully. The follow-on buyers in recent years have not specified that, and we have the helicopter landing ships tied up alongside because we don't have the expertise or the spares to fix them. So there are some current examples the ANAO has reported on which demonstrate the fallacy of relying on our best efforts. You are vulnerable in that situation to the goodwill of the supplier, and that's not normally a workable proposition.
Right. And Chair, I appreciate we've only got a couple of minutes left, but so perhaps just a yes or no, although I appreciate you'll want to put some caveats around it. But just in your opening sentence, you do say that Australia's transition to a sovereign nuclear-powered, conventionally armed submarine capability is a good idea. So that, with your breadth of experience, you are confirming that you do think that is sensible, but you just don't believe the model that's proposed through this treaty is the solution to achieving it. But the concept of a nuclear-powered sub is preferable to maintaining a diesel-based.
Yes, yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Transition, but I think we're on the wrong path to do it.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And one last question from the member for Macon.
Thank you, Chair. Rear Admiral, you've raised a number of matters that appear to me to be very serious matters. Why do you believe that the Australian government is not taking note of your concerns?
I think the whole AUKUS proposition was developed in a political environment. It was never subject to the normal defence processes in the Morrison government. It was handed across to the incoming Albanese government, and again we missed the chance to review the process itself. So it is a political, not an analytical process. It's led to a flawed plan for doing it, and we have a very uncomfortable situation that both major parties in the House, the opposition and the government, have signed up to the plan.
Do you believe that at political level it is too far down the track to now back out of it?
As I've said in my submission and various other writing, if you're on a track that doesn't go where you need to go, then there is little point in continuing down that track. We're going to lose time and money and face, but I see a change in plan as the only way to successfully complete this transition.
Rear Admiral, thank you very much. I know we're out of time, but I appreciate your presentation this afternoon.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for your attendance today, Rear Admiral. You will be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence, and we'll have the opportunity to request any correction to transcript errors. If you have been asked to provide any additional information, would you please forward to the Secretariat by close of business on the 10th of October 2025.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Next, we're going to move to our final panel for today, which are our department representatives, who I believe are in the building and will come in and set up. New faces. Okay, I think we're good to go. So I welcome representatives of the Australian Submarine Agency, the Department of Defence, the Department of Attorney General's Department and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please each state your full name and the capacity in which you are appearing before the committee?
Michaela James, Acting Head of Policy, Strategy and Engagement from the Australian Submarine Agency.
Andrew Evers, General Counsel at the Australian Submarine Agency.
Bernard Phillip, First Assistant Secretary, International Policy and Defence.
Craig Everton, Assistant Secretary for Non-Proliferation, Technology and Partnerships in the Australian Safeguards and Non-Proliferation Office in DFAT.
Tammy DeWright, Acting Assistant Secretary, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Disarmament Branch, DFAT. Emil Stoyanovsky, Assistant Secretary, Defence and National Security Division in DFAT.
Yasmin Naqvi, Director, AUKUS Trilateral Legal Framework Section, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Nicholas Burridge, Director of Climate, Human Rights Advising and Treaties Section at Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Thank you very much. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standings as the proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. It is the responsibility of witnesses to accurately record any questions on notice that are taken. I'd now like to invite you to make an opening statement before we proceed to members' questions.
Thank you. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also extend my respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and women who have served and continue to serve in the defence of Australia in times of peace and war. On behalf of the Australian Submarine Agency and departments present, I'm pleased to provide this opening statement and welcome the opportunity to assist the committee's inquiry into this bilateral treaty, the Australia-UK Nuclear-Powered Submarine Partnership and Collaboration Agreement, which was signed in Geelong on 26th of July this year, also known as the Geelong Treaty. This treaty is critical to the delivery of Australia's conventionally armed, nuclear-powered submarine program and is another milestone achieved for the AUKUS partnership. The Geelong Treaty builds on over a century of close defence cooperation between Australia and the United Kingdom. It reflects our shared commitment to a peaceful and stable Indo-Pacific, underpinned by the rules-based international order, and leverages our complementary industrial strengths to deliver a sovereign SSN capability for Australia. The treaty will enable comprehensive bilateral collaboration on the design, build, operation, sustainment and disposal of our SSN AUKUS submarines, which is a trilaterally developed submarine based on the UK's next generation design that will incorporate technologies from all three nations, including cutting-edge US submarine technologies. The treaty codifies our cooperation with each other and the US in the development of the SSN AUKUS design. It includes a commitment from the United Kingdom to deliver and transfer the equipment, material and information to enable and provide IP rights required to build Australia's SSN AUKUS capability. The treaty provides a legal framework to enable the breadth of bilateral cooperation between Australia and the UK to deliver AUKUS, including establishing governance mechanisms, program management processes and sharing of information and intellectual property. It will support the development of the personnel, workforce, infrastructure and regulatory systems required for Australia's SSN AUKUS program. It will also support port visits and the rotation of UK Astute-class submarines at HMAS Stirling under Submarine Rotational Force West. This treaty represents a long-term commitment by both nations to build the collective industrial capacity and supply chain resilience of the AUKUS partners. The treaty requires Australia and the UK to cooperate to ensure they both have industrial bases capable of building and sustaining a persistent, potent and sovereign conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarine capabilities. This is a vital part of our ability to deter and respond to threats. The Geelong Treaty builds on our existing efforts to support Australian industry to contribute to Australia's nuclear-powered submarine program. The treaty opens opportunities for industrial collaboration and provides certainty for Australian industry for the next 50 years. It provides Australian industry with the confidence to invest in uplift and create long-term stable job opportunities. The Geelong Treaty makes clear that Australia will have responsibility for the operation, maintenance and regulation of its SSN AUKUS submarines. Our SSN AUKUS submarines will operate under the sovereign command of the Royal Australian Navy and at the direction of the Australian Government. Australia has demonstrated through our long history of international cooperation that we always exercise our sovereignty in our decision-making. Some of Australia and the UK's most sensitive defence equipment will be transferred pursuant to the AUKUS partnership. In this context, to ensure the providing government does not assume additional risk or liability, the treaty requires the parties to enter into arrangements that provide appropriate reciprocal indemnities as well as risk and liability mitigations in respect of government-to-government transfers of equipment and material and the provision of services. The Geelong Treaty does not manage liability related to nuclear risks, which is governed under the AUKUS Naval Nuclear Propulsion Agreement, or the ANPAR. The Geelong Treaty reinforces our shared commitment to setting the highest non-proliferation standard in Australia's acquisition of nuclear-powered submarines, and confirms that under this treaty our activities will be carried out in accordance with Australia and the UK's respective nuclear non-proliferation obligations, as well as in the ANPAR. As a demonstration of the longevity of our partnership, the Geelong Treaty, like the ANPAR, will remain in force until 31 December 2075. By signing this treaty, Australia and the UK are making a long-term commitment to regional stability and shared security, and it is a clear signal that we will stand together to deter coercion, protect interests and shape an Indo-Pacific where all nations can prosper. Thanks.
Thank you for that opening statement. As you can imagine, we've got lots of community members with lots of questions to ask. So how I plan to do this next part is that we'll work through till we get to close to 5 o'clock, at which point, if we've still got questions, then I might encourage committee members to ask them as a question on notice to give you an opportunity to provide a written response to the committee. Quite deliberately, we decided to have you speak as the last hearing so that we could address any concerns raised by any of the other witnesses today and any submissions that have come before us. As you would appreciate, AUKUS has attracted a lot of interest in the public, and there are, fair to say, a number of myths that exist around AUKUS. So the purpose of this hearing and inquiry is to test the validity of some of the concerns that have been raised. So I'm going to start with a couple before we proceed to other members of the committee. First, in relation to the previous witness that we had, R.A. Briggs, said that one of the optimum pathway was flawed, arguing that it's not mandated in regards to local content. So there's no guarantee in AUKUS, in his opinion, for there to be that requirement for a local build. Could you state or share with us if this is true or not true, and then why?
Thanks very much for the question. So the AUKUS endeavour is a partnership of historic ambition and scale, and across the program it will create thousands of jobs and have significant industry and workforce benefits for all AUKUS partners, including Australia and Australian industry. And we are doing a lot of work to ensure Australian industry is able to maximise those opportunities through the program, and the treaty helps us to achieve that. In terms of opportunities for Australian industry, not only will they have opportunities in our program and the build program for our submarines, but we are also working with our AUKUS partners, the US and the UK, to qualify Australian industry into US and UK supply chains as well. So there will be opportunities across all three partner nations. That is good for Australia and also helps build resiliency in the trilateral submarine industrial base.
As a bit of a follow-up, in the discussions, and you might not be able to share this with us, like I do appreciate I might be delving into some state secrets here, but let me know, was it ever seen as an option to basically for the Australian government to essentially purchase the in-production design of the Virginia, US Virginia class, or a kind of a modern version of that, and through a competitive tender process then mandate that we build it in Australia?
So after AUKUS was announced in September 2020, One, there was an 18-month consultation period between the three countries that ultimately landed with an announcement in March 2023 with the optimal pathway. Over that 18-month period, a range of options were investigated and explored, and as agreed after that intense body of work between the three nations, that the optimal way for Australia to achieve a nuclear-powered submarine capability in the timeframes required and to uplift the trilateral industrial base and to ultimately ensure a greater deterrent was through the optimal pathway that was landed, which sees the US and the UK increasing visits to Australia from 2023, and then from 2027 seeing the rotational presence of US and UK submarines through the initiative called Submarine Rotational Force West. Then Australia acquiring from the US 3 Virginia-class submarines, and then us working on the SSN AUKUS submarine, a trilaterally collaboration building off the UK design, and that Australia and the UK would both build that submarine. So that intense body of work for 18 months landed on that as the best option after exploring a range of different avenues.
Okay, switching topics, another witness that we had today raised another kind of concern that's been out in the public around the use of weapons-grade uranium to power these submarines. Is this true?
So I will ask Craig from ANSO to comment.
So I can address what the international... Craig Everton from the Australian Safeguards Non-Proliferation Office. So I can address questions on the international standards and how this will be regulated. I gave evidence on this at the AUKUS Naval Nuclear Propulsion hearing in October last year. There are a range of discussions in the literature about this, but the point is that we're applying and regulating international standards of safeguards and security, and those international standards set the threshold at 20% and then set the guidelines, arrangements, requirements in a conservative way to meet every enrichment level from 20% upwards. And another point on that, and the IEA will be verifying and ensuring that we abide by our commitments. My office has a responsibility of upholding Australia's international non-proliferation commitments and doing that through robust regulation. Part of that will be IEA activities in Australia, headquarters analysis. They will design and set those in a way that not just protects the information, but also ensures that the risks are mitigated for whatever the enrichment level would be.
And what role will the community play in that? What's increasingly being used as a term is like social licence. How will the Australian government ensure that local communities, and in particular First Nations communities, have been engaged in those discussions and consultation?
I'll pass to my colleague for that one.
Thanks. So our efforts on social licence and engaging with the community is a priority for the Australian Submarine Agency, and something we're taking very seriously. Over the last several years, we've engaged in a range of activities to provide information, to field questions and answer concerns. Most recently in WA, we held 2 community information sessions, one on the 16th of September in Rockingham and one on the 18th of September in Fremantle, where leaders of the Australian Submarine Agency provided updates on the program and then moved to a Q&A format, and those community sessions will continue. That's in addition to a range of other outreach activities through pop-up engagements, lots of engagement with industry, roundtables and briefings so people understand the opportunities from an industry perspective. That will continue to be a priority and focus for us going forward.
And my final question for you before we go to the next member of the committee is, we heard some evidence from Serco about the need for an AUKUS skilled visa, so the ability for private sector skilled workers to be able to come into Australia, quite similar to what they say has already been established for defence personnel, so people who are public sector versus private sector. Was that ever on the table? Is that something that fits into a treaty like this? I know with free trade agreements it tends to be a side letter and not part of the actual treaty, but is there any thought that's been given or anything that you can say in relation to visa, like skilled workers, the skills that we don't currently have in Australia, outside of Department of Defence workers?
So I think fair to say that the transfer of people and skills between the three countries to enable AUKUS is significant, and we are certainly looking at and working on ways to ensure that is efficient and as smooth as possible. I don't have any particular updates to provide on visas. I don't know if anyone else from the table wanted to add anything.
Do you see the need of a specific visa, or do you think our current visa system facilitates the workers that we need to come in? And do you have any idea on the quantum?
In terms of the quantum, I would have to take that on notice. Australia is spending a significant amount of effort and energy at the moment to obviously build a workforce here that has the skills and capacity to deliver this program. For example, on the industry side, ASC currently has about 170 workers in Pearl Harbor learning and training from the US, so they can bring those skills back to Australia and perform work on the submarines. From a Navy perspective, Navy has about 170 personnel as well in the US training pipeline, learning those skills again so they can bring them back to Australia. So there is lots of movement of individuals between the three countries with a focus on building Australia's sovereign capacity to operate and sustain the nuclear-powered submarines.
And can you remind me of the total jobs numbers that we expect AUKUS to have here in Australia, and for over what time period?
Sure. Our estimate is about 20,000 jobs over the next 30 years across a wide range of skills and areas. So that is including the APS and the ADF, as well as industry, contractors and all of the support to not only build the yards in Osborne and the works in Stirling and Henderson, but also then the actual build of the submarine and the maintenance of the submarine.
And roughly a time period?
30 years.
30 years. Thank you. Okay. Senator Whish-Wilson, you've got the call.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can. Good on you.
Look, I've only got a couple of brief questions. In relation to disposal of nuclear waste under the scheme, the ACF earlier stated, I can't remember the exact words they used, that it's likely that the waste from the submarines would be stored on defence properties or facilities. Is that correct? And if not, what is the plan for storage of nuclear waste?
Thanks very much. So in terms of waste, there are obviously a number of different types of waste involved. In terms of intermediate and high-level radioactive waste that will be stored and disposed on current or future defence estate, no sites have yet been identified to dispose of that radioactive waste generated from the program, and a facility to dispose of high-level radioactive waste and spent nuclear fuel will not be required until the 2050s, when Australia's first nuclear-powered submarine is expected to be decommissioned. And determining those suitable locations and methods for safe and secure disposal will take time and will require community consultation, including with First Nations people, and detailed consideration of technical requirements. So that work is underway.
Have you assessed the UK situation with the disposal of their nuclear waste, as well as the decommissioning of the submarines and the reactors? Some of them are many years old, decades old, yet they haven't finalised their Well, we heard today they haven't finalised details for how they're going to do it.
Yes, aware of their current arrangements, and just to reference the treaty, what it references on this is that there is clauses in the treaty that Australia will not receive spent nuclear fuel or high-level radioactive waste from the United Kingdom, nor the US, but the treaty obviously just deals with the United Kingdom.
Okay. We've heard today, and I think it's been discussed quite broadly, that there may be matters outside of your control and all of our controls in terms of receiving the Virginia submarines as to fill the capability gap. Is there a backup plan? What happens if that capability gap isn't filled? I asked the previous witness if it's even possible for us to continue with the Collins-class submarines in the next 10, 15 years. What's plan B if this occurs? And I just want to emphasise again that these things are probably outside of our control. You may work very hard and do a great job, but these things may well be out of our control.
So I think how I would respond to that is just noting that AUKUS is in the strategic interests of all three countries, and we are working to deliver the optimal pathway as I described it previously. All three countries are investing significantly to make that happen. Obviously aware of the US review that is underway, and we are confident in that the US will continue to find that the program is in line with its interests. And I think, Bernard, did you want to add any points there?
Oh, just yeah.
So sorry, could I just clarify? I don't want to make a statement, but obviously strategic interests and political interests can change all the time, and they do. My question was, is there any scenario planning for a backup plan if we don't get these submarines in time?
I think what I'd say there, Senator, is, through the development of the optimal pathway, Australia considered the full suite of options available, and that set of options is well understood. But in the course of that exhaustive development of the optimal pathway, we determined that the avenue that we're pursuing is the one that best serves our interests, and that is the one that has been agreed with our two AUKUS partners.
So if the capability gap wasn't filled, technically speaking, would the Collins-class submarines still be functional in the next 10 to 15 years? Can they be extended beyond their current planned life schedule?
Defence is providing advice to government on options for extending the life of the Collins-class submarines, and that will be subject to further government decisions. But a consideration is certainly how do we maintain a submarine capability.
Okay. My last question, I suppose, was I read that that Defence is still developing an autonomous underwater submarine will have AI, functional capability. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? I also read with interest that it said it would be for higher risk operations. I would have thought any submarine under the ocean would be a high risk operation. But can you tell us more about why these submarines are being developed and where it's at?
Well, Senator, the government has announced that we are investing in the Ghost Shark autonomous undersea capability. We think in terms of the future of undersea warfare, there'll be an important role for crewed capabilities like those that we're acquiring under SSN, under AUKUS Pillar 1, but also for uncrewed autonomous capabilities. It's a mixture that will best enable our Navy to respond to the future undersea environment.
Yeah, so when you say the government's investing in this, is manufacturing of that started yet, or is it still at an early planning phase?
Well, there was an announcement by the government, I think last month, in terms of the development of the Ghost Shark undersea autonomous capability, and that work is well advanced in terms of development of prototype capabilities, and then working with the company Anduril on the production and bringing into service of that capability.
Right, so I'll follow that up. Just this last question from me. If the AUKUS SSNs weren't to proceed, is there any way the Australian government could get our $5 billion back from the UK? Is there anything in the contract that would allow a refund of that money back to Australian taxpayers?
Thanks for the question. So the Australian government has made a contribution to the United Kingdom because they will be uplifting their capacity to deliver components for us. In the case of the £2.4 billion that was paid, it's an uplift for Rolls-Royce submarines for the reactors that will be provided. That contribution is assessed as fair, reasonable and proportionate, and I think fair to say we have appropriate arrangements in place to protect Australia's interests.
So that's respectfully, that's the last comment's a little bit vague. So if we don't get the delivery of submarines, do we get them back, or is that sunk capital from a taxpayer's point of view?
So the treaty sets out that in the event that a party provides notice to terminate, the parties shall consult with a review to manage the consequences of termination on a proportionate, justifiable, fair and mutually transparent basis.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We'll now move to the member for Hasluck.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Go for it.
Lovely, thank you. I think the questions both the Senator and the Chair have asked go some way to the concerns that were raised by previous witnesses. And I just want to, though, open it more broadly to assess if, in consideration of the previous witnesses' submissions or other comments that you've heard generally from industry or community, whether, in fact, there are other perhaps views that you would like to have us consider to counter some of the conclusions that those witnesses have reached in their submissions.
Thanks. Very happy to talk at a high level about the strategic rationale for the program and the progress that we were making. I think there's some of the issues that have been raised in the earlier testimony that has been provided today. Our region is facing the most challenging strategic circumstances since the Second World War, and at a time when Australia's economic connection to the world has never been greater, and we are witnessing unprecedented conventional and non-conventional military build-up with a lack of transparency or strategic reassurance. And to mitigate that increasingly challenging strategic environment, Australia has adopted a strategy of denial through deterrence, through the National Defence Strategy, and Australia's acquisition of conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines will enhance our capacity to deter coercion and increase the ADF's ability for impactful protection. There is no other platform that matches the stealth, the range, the endurance, the speed, the mobility and mix of capabilities that a nuclear-powered submarine provides. And it is for that reason that we are pursuing that. A conventionally powered submarine will be less able to meet our needs in the decades ahead. And so moving to a nuclear-powered submarine capability will ensure that we are able to best protect Australians and Australia's national interests. In terms of progress on delivery of the optimal pathway and how we are going towards the build of SSN AUKUS, which I know again was discussed earlier, Australia and the UK are rapidly progressing delivery of SSN AUKUS. Work to deliver the submarines is well underway with the shipbuilder, Australian shipbuilder on contract and mobilising. Infrastructure enabling works are underway. Supply chain qualification activities are progressing. We are participating in the design process and workforce build-up is occurring. So across Australia and the UK, significant progress has already made. It is an ambitious program with demanding timelines, and a lot of work is currently underway to realise the benefits of AUKUS, which is about collectively uplifting that industrial capacity. And I'll pause there if there was any specific further aspects raised earlier you wanted us to touch on.
No, that's helpful, I think, just to provide that high-level understanding of the why for this treaty. I think that's really important. In terms of how this treaty works in with other treaties, can you just talk to a little bit how, to the extent to which it's consistent with our other treaty obligations?
Certainly. So, as I mentioned in the opening statement, we do have a trilateral treaty between the three AUKUS partners, the AUKUS Naval Nuclear Propulsion Treaty Agreement, and that enables the transfer of information, material and technology, nuclear information equipment and material, and the two treaties, the AMPA and this treaty, are designed to complement each other, and you will see multiple references throughout the Geelong Treaty that reference back to the AMPA. It's also, in terms of our collaboration with the UK, I understand the committee is also currently considering the DSCA treaty, and once again, these treaties are designed to complement each other. Did you want to add anything?
Just to add a little bit of additional detail on the interaction between the trilateral AMPA and the bilateral Geelong Treaty. So the reason that the AMPA was a requirement, a legal requirement, both for the US and the UK, was because as Nikki has noted, this is an enabling treaty that allows a nuclear weapons state to transfer nuclear material and equipment and information to a non-nuclear weapons state. The US is required under its Atomic Energy Act to have a treaty in order to transfer that type of material and equipment to another state, and the UK is also obliged under the Mutual Defence Agreement that it has with the US to also have a treaty to enable it to do so. However, it is just an enabling treaty. It doesn't require the transfers to happen under that treaty. That's where the Geelong Treaty comes in. This is a bilateral treaty that does oblige the parties to transfer material, equipment and information that's reasonably required for the build of the SSN AUKUS. So there are a number of ways that the two treaties interact. Once there is a transfer of nuclear equipment or material, all of the conditions and requirements applicable to that under the AMPA also apply to the transfer of that material and equipment. Thank you.
Thank you. And you did give some examples there of the practical elements of this Geelong Treaty. Are there other examples you'd like to speak to that, brings the words to life as to what it will mean, particularly for businesses and industry within Australia and workforce opportunities?
So the treaty provides a legal framework to enable the breadth of cooperation between Australia and the United Kingdom on Pillar 1. So that will obviously include supporting Australia in acquiring a conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarine capability. But it also demonstrates Australia and the UK's shared intent to generate sovereign industrial growth, strengthen global supply chains and promote regional security and stability. As I mentioned previously, importantly, the treaty is a treaty-level commitment from the UK to deliver and transfer the equipment, material and information and to provide and enable the intellectual property rights required to build our SSN AUKUS capability. And the treaty includes provisions that will enable us to facilitate the delivery of both nations' SSN AUKUS programs, enables the port visits and rotational presence in Australia of UK Astute-class submarines, and does support the development of personnel, workforce, infrastructure and regulatory systems. So in providing that legal architecture, it does enable us, as I mentioned previously, for Australian industry to have confidence in the direction of the program, and there is significant work underway currently to provide those opportunities for Australian industry to be involved in not only our program but the US and UK programs as well.
Thank you. And if I can just to round that out then, is it possible that any long-term defence capabilities might be foregone due to the financial commitment to AUKUS submarines? And how do you would you describe this might affect Australia's overall security posture?
I think what I would say there is that the government has given us direction through the National Defence Strategy 2024 to develop a focused Australian Defence Force that is able to deliver on a strategy of denial in terms of preventing threats to Australian interests. In order to do that, we are seeking to acquire capabilities across all domains, and the capabilities that we're acquiring through AUKUS are central to our strategy. We keep that capability acquisition under regular review, particularly through the 2-year cycle of national defence strategies that we have. So the next one will be considered by government in 2026. And through that process, we are providing advice to government on the range of capabilities that we'll need across domains to defend Australia's interests.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member for Hasluck. Now going to the Member for Lyne with some questions. You've got the call, Alison.
Thank you, Chair. If I can ask some questions in relation to safety regulation and then on the matter raised earlier of social licence. So in terms of the treaty, are there any obligations for the UK to transfer or require standards for the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Regulator?
I'll talk more broadly first. In terms of nuclear stewardship, overall the treaty does reflect in it the Australian and UK unwavering commitment to safely and securely steward our nuclear-powered submarines through their entire life cycle. There is a nuclear stewardship article which does underscore obligation for the parties to manage, store, operate, use, transport and dispose of any nuclear equipment or material in accordance with their respective domestic international obligations relating to safety, security and safeguards. In the treaty, there are also provisions about Australia enhancing and maintaining its capacity to carry out the activities envisaged under the treaty responsibly, and for the UK to support Australia develop this capacity.
Okay, thank you. There was evidence earlier today from witnesses raising concerns about radiological pollution in the UK. I'm interested in understanding Australia has been home to visits by nuclear-powered submarines, and we have a radiation monitoring program. Is it envisaged that that program is the baseline for the new regulator, and that the UK will assist in developing higher standards for Australia's own nuclear submarine program?
So, as I said, the government is committed to maintaining the highest levels of nuclear stewardship to protect the health and safety of the people and the environment. And Australia, with our AUKUS partners, will be establishing, or where they already exist, enhancing environmental monitoring programs. As to the exact support that the UK will be providing the new Australian safety regulator for nuclear-powered submarines, that's a question I would have to defer to them on. But there is extensive collaboration.
Yeah, that's. I mean, look, I'm concerned, and to your point earlier about social licence, that suggestions that visiting or nuclear submarines are releasing radiological pollution that's going unmonitored has the potential to undermine public confidence in AUKUS. And so I'm just trying to understand particularly how the UK's experience in this space may be of benefit to Australia's new regulator. If that's not a question you're able to ask here today, I completely understand, but I think it is an issue that does need to be addressed. So I assume you can't answer my question, so I'll move on to my next one, which is in relation to the social licence components. I note on the website of the Australian Submarine Agency that there's no simple Q&A that goes to some of the key concerns that the public are raising. You noted those public meetings recently. As a former social licence consultant in a previous life, these sorts of information portals, I think, are critical. Is it something that's being considered to add to the website that's already in place to enhance public knowledge?
Thanks. I'll just, one additional point on your prior question, the environmental monitoring programs that I mentioned, they will build on existing transparency and safety measures and leverage our partners' experience. So some of that exchange that you referenced is taking place. In terms of the ASA website, there are a number of fact sheets about the program in the website. I'll take back the accessibility of those and ease to find them. But certainly we are wanting to ensure that there is readily available information to the Australian public about the program. And at the moment, those fact sheets cover things not only about progress on the program, but also around our nuclear stewardship, our safety and security approach around nuclear waste, around our non-proliferation obligations. We'll make sure that we'll continue to make sure that that information is readily accessible and available.
Is there, my last question, Chair, is there an active team within ASA that is monitoring public comments about some of these safety matters, about radiological pollution, to make sure that the information, the response from the agency, from government, is enabling that social licence? If concerns are left unresponded to, it can be, it will undermine the confidence in the program. So is there an active group of, people that are able to build responses as issues arise?
So within the ASA, we do have social licence teams that are looking at the range of questions and comments that are received about the program and how and where we can best respond and ensure that accurate information is in the public domain, and completely agree that where there is information that isn't accurate, we would need to be ensuring that there is information available to clarify and ensure people have access to the factual information.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask a question to take on notice, and if we could get a response back, just to sort of follow up on what the member for Lyne has asked, and in relation to the evidence given earlier today, just for the purposes of our committee in this report, I appreciate that you may not have been able to hear the witness earlier. UK witness that was suggesting that there has been high levels of nuclear waste from nuclear-powered submarines leaking into oceans, that is causing environmental damage, is getting into waterways systems and into cropping. So therefore, appreciate in the UK they have a much more developed nuclear industry than we do in Australia. They have a lot more community engagement and awareness. They've also had their own history and experience with nuclear. So if you could take on notice the evidence given to the previous in earlier witnesses and provide us with a clarification on how in Australia under this agreement we would manage concerns that are being raised, and then how we would publicly respond to those. Would there be a parliamentary process involved? How would the public know if concerns are being raised, that they are being addressed? What's the transparency piece? So if you could take that on notice and respond to us, those specific examples and how we would address them if they were to be raised in the Australian context. But I won't take the space that we've got left from the member for Macon, who's going to ask our final questions today.
Thank you, Chair. Ms James, I'm going to go back to the question asked by Senator Peter Whish-Wilson. And my question is, why was a minimum Australian workforce participation content number not included in this agreement as it was with the Collins class build?
So as I have indicated, the opportunities for Australian industry...
No, I'm aware of the opportunities, but why was there a minimum number not included in this agreement?
I think I'll just repeat what I said earlier, that the government is committed to delivering opportunities for Australian industry, and the treaty does require Australia and the UK to cooperate to support the enhancement and optimisation.
That's already on the record. You don't have to repeat it. So obviously you're not prepared to give an answer on that. My second question relates to your response to the Senator, where you quoted Article 21G. And for the record, I'll read it out. In the event that a party provides notice to terminate this agreement in accordance with paragraph F of this article, the parties shall consult with a view to manage the consequences of termination on a proportionate, justifiable, fair and mutually transparent basis. Who determines all of those qualifications that are in Part G?
So it would be a matter to be settled between the two governments at the time.
I understand that, but by who? Who's going to do that? I mean, two parties are obviously in some kind of negotiation, but if they don't come to an agreement, who determines whether something is proportionate, justifiable, fair or transparent, whatever the case is?
So under the treaty there is a number of provisions around governance and how the treaty implementation will be managed. The treaty requires us to appoint a senior official from each nation to meet on a regular basis and oversee and monitor activities under the agreement. So that would be the first avenue I would suggest. The treaty also sets out a requirement for ministers, the UK's Secretary of State for Defence and the Australian Minister for Defence or their representatives to meet on a mutually determined basis and again to discuss the management and implementation of the agreement. So there are several channels identified through the treaty.
Okay. My last question. A number of the people who have made submissions have made the statement that the nuclear submarines will be obsolete by around 2050, generally. Given that we won't be getting our first submarine till about 2040 or thereabouts, is that a concern for the government that the submarines may be obsolete by 2050?
So in terms of technological advances and development, which is one of the reasons that people sometimes put forward that claim, I think it's important to remember that technology, not only detection advances, but also counter-detection and stealth advances. We see many countries investing significantly in nuclear-powered submarine capabilities, given assessments about their superior qualities and their superior advantages, and all of those countries have long-term programs similar to the duration of this program. So I think that collective assessment is that they will continue to be an important and potent capability to defence forces around the world.
Okay. Perhaps I'll finish with, sorry, Chair. So I assume that as part of the, because this treaty is for 50 years or something, isn't it? It goes through to 2075. Mm-hmm. As part of the process, there is an opportunity, and I think it says it in the treaty, to review all the details from time to time.
Yeah, so there is a decennial review that is built into the treaty to work to continue to optimise its implementation as the program progresses.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe that brings us to an end. A few other committee members have indicated that they might put questions in writing. That will come back to you. So thank you very much. Just before I end, was there any closing statement that you wanted to make? Just add to something, address something, like we covered a broad range of topics. There's a number of you here. So in the last few minutes, is there anything further that you wish to add? Great. Okay. Thank you for your attendance here today. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence, and we'll have the opportunity to request corrections to any transcript errors. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, and there were a few questions there, please forward to the Secretariat by close of business October 10th, 2025. So thank you very much for your time. And I've got a few words, and I now declare this hearing closed. That's all I had to say. Yep, great.